All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to call this meeting to order for February 5th, 2019, and that is the Town of Scituate's Board of Selectmen's meeting. So at this moment, I'd accept the agenda.
So moved.
A motion by Mr. Vignani.
Second.
Second by Mr. Harris. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Starting off, are there any walk-ins? All right. Seeing none, we are now ahead of the game here. Let's go to the report of James Boudreau, our town administrator. Jim.
I'll try to keep us on schedule. A couple things real quick. As the board aware, we had an accident last week on main lot in 3A involving a town vehicle. I went up there to make sure everything was okay. Luckily, no injuries from any of the parties. But while I was there, I walked the site with Chief Scituate and town engineer Sean McCarthy, looked at the sight lines, looked at the signage. Based on that meeting, I directed the engineer to purchase 2 illuminated stop signs, similar to the ones you see at Grove and Prospect in Norwell or at the YMCA in Hanover. They light up. Those are actually due in this week. We will also be getting 2 illuminated stop ahead signs. They're a special order. They'll be a little bit later, and those will go further up main lot. It seems in this accident, the person who caused it came right across, traveling eastbound, didn't even stop at the stop sign, went right across, hit the town truck, pushed it into a car sitting on main lot westbound. Didn't even hit the brakes from what we can see. So putting these lights in, these lighted signs, we think will at least give a visual reminder to people that that intersection's coming up. So that's number one.
I think, Jim, that's a great idea. I know Jim had told me that, but I obviously was going to wait till you mentioned it to the board. And I will say, if it's successful, which I assume it will be, it's certainly a consideration for maybe some other intersections in town. Kevin, you might know some of it, and be a little understanding of maybe if we find those intersections, to put maybe stop signs with pulsating lights on it to some degree. Yep.
We could just
Signs are about $1,800 a piece. So, but we're just going to get those and we'll figure out.
Good. No, so money well spent.
Water update, the old Oak and Bucket plant is now shut down. Well 17 is online and running through the temporary green sand filtration system. The water's been tested, it meets all the requirements from the DEP for everything and taste. Currently, well 17 with the other wells will meet our demands. Well 18, the green sand filter is about 95% complete to bring that online. It just needs the installation of a chem feed and a final inspection. So people understand the green sand filter takes the iron and manganese out of the water. So that's what leads to the discoloration of the water. The sand filter, the removal of the existing system has started. The company doing the work has brought in extra workers to try to keep up to speed. We're currently draining the sedimentation basin. The track vac system company's on notice. We'll schedule them based upon when the sedimentation basin goes down. Also, the water project bid for the remaining 2.2 miles of water main down on Oceanside and some other streets is scheduled to be open on 2/21, so we'll have that for an upcoming board meeting. And related to that, we got the reports from the ice pigging that took place this last year. Based on the sampling, we removed 145.889 pounds of sediment from the pipes, from about 3.5 mile of pipes. That's way more than we could ever do through flushing, so I think we're off to a good start. Zuez is due back in town the next couple of weeks, a month or so. We'll plan the next round of ice pigging and continue getting at those pipes. But the amount of sedimentation that we took out of there, and Kevin, it was mostly iron and manganese they found?
Yeah, it's pretty much all iron.
So, and that was about $77,000 we spent, which to get that amount of stuff out of the pipes is a pretty good bang for the buck, so we're going to continue doing that.
How many approximate miles does that equate to?
It was about 20,700 linear feet, or about 3.4 miles of pipe, various diameters.
Pretty good.
So we're going to keep at it.
Just one question before we move on, and I think you and I might have spoke about it, Jim. It has to do with the construction of the shed on Tack Factory, Pond Road, a structure.
Yep.
And we think we had spoken, can we talk to Ty and Bond or whoever the engineer is about trying to push it back away from the residents if we can? Can we look at
Yeah,
that?
I know you spoke to me, you spoke to Kevin.
Yeah, can I address that just quickly? One of the neighbors had called up. We were dealing with one of the neighbors who lived there, and I thought he was spreading some of the information to the other neighbors, which wasn't occurring. One of the direct abutters had contacted me, and I told him to talk to his neighbors if they all agree to have one representative. I'll have the one representative come in, meet with Ty and Bond, and we'll see what we can do. We can work with building color, screening, whatever else needs to be done. The restrictions are basically setbacks, I believe, from the stream that's back there.
All right.
Certain setbacks that have to go.
All right.
We'll work with them the best we can.
Okay, all right, okay. I'll touch bases with you maybe tomorrow or the next day if I can. Thank you.
Finally, I received a report from Al Bangert on the noise study for the wind turbine. That has been postponed for the time being. The Scituate wind is in the process of addressing a high temperature reading, which causes the turbine to run at reduced power. So even if the wind is blowing at a higher speed, the turbine is running at a reduced speed, reduced noise. So Al and Scituate Wind did not feel it was right to be running the test if the windmill is not running at the optimum speed and power. So they're going to address that. Once that's done, then that study's ready to go. And that's what I got for tonight.
Any idea on the time frame of that?
Just they're working on it right now. Tony trying to
So
figure
is
out
it
why
going
it's
to be
going off.
delayed a week, a month, 6
Hopefully no
months?
more than a couple weeks.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So tell me again, what's the problem?
There's a high,
Let me just say one
high
thing.
temperature reading in the turbine.
In the turbine
When
itself,
the turbine gets that, it reduces the power on the turbine so as not to overheat.
doesn't burn it.
So
Okay.
no matter the wind speed, the turbine is reducing the spinning to keep the turbine cool. They don't know if it's an actual issue or if it's a sensor, but they're trying to figure it out.
If the, just one quick question.
No, go ahead.
If it's not functioning, contractually, what happens if they're not producing the electricity because there's an equipment malfunction? How does that play out?
You get ours first,
Okay.
so basically they're losing money. 'Cause they're not producing
Plus, they
enough.
owe us money, no matter what. So, under the contract,
We're
they either don't
guaranteed.
make money, but we're guaranteed money in the chance that it's shut down on their own, by their own.
Because it's something they've done.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Tony?
Yeah, the only thing, I just got a text that the TV's not coming in. I don't know, are you aware of that?
Yeah, they said my end's fine, Comcast's working on it right now, the other end's fine.
Awesome.
So that's all I
That's
have
it?
tonight, yep.
Any other questions? All right. Jim, thank you very much. Let's move on to our scheduled items. The first is a 6:20 discussion vote, special events for the St. Patrick's Day Parade, and I see Ed Kelly's here. Ed, good evening.
Good evening.
Come on up to the table here, appreciate it. This is the same event that you've been running, nothing changed, except I noticed that you're trying to get into the cafeteria at the old Gates School. Is that one of the things that you're asking for? I thought I saw
We
you.
ask for that every year, yeah, so that we can feed the performers.
Okay. I'm not really sure, Jim, if that's possible.
Last year, actually, we didn't use it. They gave us a couple of rooms in the, I think it was the A-wing.
On the A-wing, okay.
So I-
All
we'll
right, so you're
probably
just
end up
looking
doing
for
that.
space in the building to be able to feed people?
Really up to Kevin and Kelly what they can find for space, but we
Okay.
should be able to make something available.
All right. That was the only thing, because I've seen the cafeteria, and it may not be
Right, well,
functional at
that's what
this
happened
point.
last year. They had so much stuff down there, they said they couldn't get it
Well,
out.
this year, there's been some people who've broken in, kids,
Oh.
so they've caused some damage, that's all. Well, I have no questions. I know the event well, and obviously, I think a lot of people know the event well. So I think it's ran well last year, and, the years before.
Yeah, the weather didn't cooperate, though. It was the coldest parade we ever had last year.
Was it really?
Yes, it was.
Yes.
Well, you could always put it in April, like you did a few years ago. It was
You
nice
know-
and warm then.
We just wouldn't be calling it the St. Patrick's Day Parade, that's all.
Still could, it's just whether or not you have
Yeah,
the same
right.
effect or not, Ed.
Just didn't have the same effect.
Questions from the board, anybody?
No, if it's the same, no.
No?
Do you have any candidates yet?
No, we have no candidates for mayor yet. That could be a big dent in our income this year if we don't get anybody to run.
All right, so people out there, if this ends up on TV land,
It ends up on TV land.
it's
We
a
need candidates. I mean,
great funding,
We'll start
and
the
it's
race
fun.
whenever we get at least 2 people, so.
By percentage, that's a big fundraiser for you, isn't it?
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
it's probably a quarter to a third of our
Wow,
income for the
wow,
parade.
wow.
Well, think of it this way, if people are watching TV, if nobody's actually thrown their hat in the proverbial ring, you've got a really good chance of winning, so. I'd suggest do it
Can't
sooner
start
than
racing
later,
unless
right?
there's 2.
All right, is there a motion?
Move to approve a special event permit for the St. Patrick's Day Parade on March 17th, 2019, from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m.
Motion by Mr. Harris, seconded by West Canfield, so it's actually on the date itself, St.
Yeah.
Patrick's Day.
Awesome.
Have you had that before? It's
Yeah, like
actually
every
been on the
6
date?
years.
It does, okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Ed, thank you.
Okay, guys, thanks.
Thank you, good luck.
All right, moving on to 6:30.
All right, we'll share.
Discuss, vote, entertainment license for June 29th, July 13th, August 17th, Chris Kennedy and Susanna Adams, Kennedy Garden Center. Let me get down to my stuff here.
There you go.
Hi, good evening, Chris, Susanna. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. So you're looking for special events, right? I'm going to get to the thing here. Hang on. Outdoor, hang on, let me get to it here. Thank you. There it is. Okay. And this is for, what exactly is it for, if you don't mind me asking?
It's 3 weddings. And we've done events over the years. We had one in the fall that was loud, as you'll probably mention. And 2 of them are asking for a band that is plugged in. So trying to figure out where we go in these situations, because it is entertainment. And I need to make sure that I'm being a good neighbor, business person. And a lot of the events don't require that. And these particular ones are asking for that. And it's in the summer, and I figured I would try to ask now instead of telling the bride
Right.
if we have to make a change of plan closer to.
Good. So here's my predicament. I know that you came in the fall, and I forgot what the event was. But prior, you'd come in, I can't recall at the time. Was it a year ago, 2 years ago? And I remember saying then, what I'm going to say now, which is, I'm concerned over the use. My understanding of your use is for horticulture. I don't know what the premise of that was. In other words, whether it was granted back prior to zoning, so you were a non-conforming use, whether it was granted when zoning was adopted, which begs the question whether you have a variance. And I only ask that because I don't know. That's an important question, because if you're getting into a new type of use, which is really what's kind of happening here, while we could license music, the use in of itself is not necessarily allowed, which is really a zoning issue, which I think you have to go to the zoning board. But without knowing the history of the property, I can't tell you whether it's permitted or not. And that's the concern I have. Globally, looking at it from a micro standpoint, certainly, you know, I look at your business, I look at A to Z Boating, the guy, I forgot the gentleman across the street who makes sales, and as we work your way up 3A, you know, you can get to PJs and you got the Knights, although the Knights is a different type of use. Should that, and this goes to more of a planning perspective, should that be really one business area because of all the businesses that are there? And that's a topic that certainly could be had, but not here. Because if it was a business area, then what you're looking to do would be permissible. The fact that it's not in the business area and the fact that we don't know what the underlying purpose of the use is causes problem for me, because I'm saying you're asking for a license to permit something that might not be allowed in the first place, Chris.
Okay.
And so what I would be looking for is I'd be looking for guidance from the zoning board. And I don't know if you've spoken to Bob Vogel or to Neil, and I don't know what the research on the history of the property. I believe it was your grandparents who bought it or had it or somebody. I just don't know how it came into existence at what point in time.
Right.
But I would need to know that before I could rule on this. Do I think it's a good thing? I absolutely. You need to be able to augment your business and try to make money to be able to keep it here. The problem I have, just fundamentally, is if you're not allowed to do it based upon the initial basis for it, then you need to get permission to expand it, which is the nonconformity. Or if it's a variance, then you need to go and ask for permission to be able to expand your business through a variance or something.
Okay.
But if we were to go, I mean, ultimately, if Brad Washburn and the planning department and the planning board says, you know, we want to change the business area through the master plan, which is going to take some time, I'd be like, why not? It makes sense from the bridge all the way up to Greenbush. There's a lot of business going on there. But that's the issue I have when I looked at this, and I'm glad to hear that you're trying to get this resolved before commitment, because I was thinking there might be a few angry brides
Well,
to hear this.
I mean, I said yes because I've been saying this for years that we've been doing this. You guys have been approving the ones that we did
Yep.
do. But I knew 2 neighbors complained to me. I figured I better, give you guys as much heads up as possible, and also the brides. So they are booked. Now the question is, do I go back to them and say, you have to be acoustic, you have to be unplugged? That's my understanding, is the difference between an entertainment license and not. So I want to do the right thing for them, and I want to do the right thing for the town and for my neighbors and for you guys.
Our next meeting is the 19th, so 2 weeks away.
Okay.
Is it something that maybe you, between now, get in touch with Bob Vogel and Jim, I'm looking towards you, and Neil Duggan, so we can get something to find out? Because that to me is the problem right now. We can certainly issue a license for outdoor entertainment. That's our purview.
Okay?
But that's not the issue in my mind. The issue is, are you allowed to do it in the first place? So, for example, people come to us as a residents and say, look, we're going to have a party at our house. They do that once every maybe 10, 20 years, if that. Party for graduation. So they say, we're going to have outdoor
Correct.
entertainment.
Right.
So we permit it. We understand it's not a band. They're not operating a business to make money for their family and for, parties. They're just running a party. And if the neighbors don't like it, well, guess what? They can throw a party in the future and they can annoy their neighbor. But this
Right.
is different because it's a business for profit.
Okay.
So that changes it from the private sector or from
Okay.
a citizens, that's all.
All right.
But that's my view. I don't know what anybody else feels, and my feeling would be, I'd like to know what their view of it is. And then it could be as simple as curing this by saying, file for a special permit. Zoning board takes a look at it and says, yeah, it fits in, whatever they're going to decide. Or it may be that, no, that it's permitted, or maybe they might say it's not. I just need that guidance, that's all.
And my guess is that I'm not going to get any kind of answer from zoning in the 2 weeks. It's kind of pushing that. So I'm
Well, you could
thinking I
get-
should let them,
You could get an answer from the zoning enforcement officer,
okay,
who could say he believes it's either allowed or it's not allowed,
right.
all right? And then that decision is appealable to the zoning board of appeals by either yourself or by one of the neighbors.
Right.
But he would make the ruling as to whether it meets current zoning or your special permit.
Right.
He would give the advice of saying, or the guidance, it's either this or this or this, and that would be the basis upon you being able to get or
Right.
not being able to. That's all.
Okay.
I don't know if anybody else, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, because frankly, as I say, you have a good business, and frankly, I don't know how the place across the river is permitted to do what they're doing, because frankly, in my view, that's a violation of the zoning. And they had a business for boats, and now it's a restaurant with people pulling up and eating and partying, and frankly, it's not business zone, and it shouldn't be there. And, if it was there for the years, I'd be different, but it's not. But whatever happened in Marshfield happened, and that's Marshfield's issue.
Yeah, and I don't think that what's happening across the river should affect me too much the other way if I handle it hopefully the right way. And
Right.
I would be happy to go about it the right way. I do need to let these particular people know, but the big band kind of a thing isn't really, they asked us if we could do it. We do it. We do events. I'm like, okay. But I want to get approval first, so if I will tell them no if that's what you say, but I need to
I would say wait
find out
2
if-
weeks, talk to the zoning enforcement officer.
All right.
So he can give you his opinion or his decision, because he looks at the zoning bylaws and he'll tell you, this is my interpretation of what it is.
Right.
And then, obviously, if you think it's wrong, you can appeal it, but generally, they're pretty spot on with and that will tell you what, if you need to get a special permit, then you file with the zoning, and then you go on the zoning thing. That may delay you until March, but, you know, but the long and short of it is, while it may impact your short term, if it permits you to do it, then long term, you'll be able to do a lot more, and that's all. Sean?
Tony, do you want to speak?
Go ahead, Al.
All right, well, could we, my biggest concern are your neighbors, that's all. I think you're thinking outside the box. I think it's gonna come up more and more. It's a unique setting. I think it's a great idea. If the neighbors are on board, I you know, for me to sit here and say, oh, sure, it's a great idea, and I'm not in a butter, that's really not fair. But Chris, you're not, you know, he's not gonna do the wrong thing. He's been in business for 50 years, and they want to stay in business another 50 years, so they're not gonna get their neighbors mad or upset without correcting it. Could we grant him these 3 dates? Because Chris told these people, thinking, and I believe him, you know, he thought he could come here, get the special permit, give him these 3 dates, so everyone involved is happy. And my big concern is just, you know, work it out with the neighbors so you don't have that one band that's gonna really upset them.
Right.
And then, at the same time, simultaneously talk to the zoning enforcement officer and see if he has to go before the ZBA. But stuff like this is gonna happen more and more. Businesses need to get creative. They can't just sell the same thing. They have to do other things and other services. And when Chris came before us, I was like, wow, you know, I didn't see it. But now, obviously, there's a demand for it, more and more. But at the same time, your neighbors bought next to a garden center, and
Understand
you know,
that.
so you know, it's a balance.
Yeah,
Do you have anything to say?
I do have something to say.
Oh, you do?
I always have something to say.
I figured you did. I was kind of staring, I'm like, all right, well, maybe she doesn't. 'Cause-
No, I mean, you touched on, to me, the outdoor entertainment, I think John described the hesitation very well. The outdoor entertainment is, in my view, is when your neighbor wants to have a party and it's a one-shot thing, and it's not really, yes, it's really not allowed in a residential neighborhood, but it's an accommodation that we would all give our neighbors. That for you to have, you know, multiple events lined up, I think it's not the right vehicle for that approval, and I think you should go through these steps. To Tony's point, did you say one isn't having a band?
One, we don't know about the entertainment. I don't have anything
It's not
confirmed.
scheduled. Yeah, it's not, the one is not scheduled as entertainment. We just included it here because it was
Sure.
another wedding, and we just figured we'd lump it in.
Is that the latter one?
And that's the first one,
Oh, it's
just
the
in
first
June.
one, the June, okay.
Yeah, but I think because, you know, it is a business opportunity for you, you're right to want to cross the Ts and dot the Is on this. And, you know, if it's okay with the brides to do a little bit more homework, I think that I would feel more comfortable. I have the same reservations, not, you know, to Sean's point, not the fact that this is something you want to go towards, but it's important that if you're building, business is expanding, that it's within the confines of what you're allowed to do in that district.
Okay.
And that and the abutters have an opportunity to have input into that as a business model, not as a one-off thing.
Okay.
That's sort of where I came out on it.
So why don't we do this? Meet with the zoning enforcement officer, come back to our meeting on the 19th. We could then entertain what Sean's suggestion. The only thing is, if somebody were to file a complaint, these are, potentially, if they put a cease and desist order, you're done, and that's what I'm saying. So all I'm trying to say is, first find that out, come back to us, we can discuss it at the 19th. But again, I just caution you that if you end up doing it, you might do so at your own peril too, if it's wrong. So I just telling you up front. But that would be my position.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else?
Yeah. So I am the neighbor next door,
Yes, you are.
and it is extremely loud when there's when there's amplified music there. Very loud as Roots is when they're playing on Wednesday nights. It's a residential area. You got a special variance to have your garden shop in a residential area. And I don't know that there's many more residents than business in that stretch of land, so I don't know about turning the whole thing into a business district. But we've given you the opportunity to do it in the past as kind of a one-off thing, but now when there's 3 weddings that come before us, on your website, you say that you're a venue, and you're out there looking for people to do it, so your goal is to have it 52 weeks a year as a business model, and that's not what any of the neighbors got moved in the neighborhood to be next to, a function hall facility. The music is very loud, and, you have 250 people there, you don't have parking for them, they've got to go off-site, and it's really not built for that many people, I don't think. Sometimes you put it inside in the greenhouse, but it's a non-insulated building, so there's really no buffer to the sound. It's almost as if it was outside. So I don't mind you occasionally having events there, but it seems like if we go down the path that there's just going to be an event more and more and more of them. So when there was 1 a year or 2 a year and they're fundraising, or it's, your niece's wedding and that sort of stuff, that's all fine to do there. But when you're actually actively booking on your website saying, here's 20 events, pick one of them and we'll run it for you, then it's a different ball of wax, and it's not a garden shop anymore. It's a venue for functions, and I don't think it should ever be amplified, because any time that they do it, it's just like being outside. If these people wanted to have their weddings and it was acoustical, then I certainly don't want these weddings to, these people who are planning to have their wedding there to be disappointed.
Right.
But the amplified, it's a wedding. There's entertainment at weddings.
Right.
And it's usually not a nice little quiet event. So they probably want to have loud music, dancing, and a party. And it really echoes, you're in a wetland area, and it echoes across the lakes, and it echoes to all the area there, and it's loud.
And I'm not, that's why I brought this up, and that's why I brought it up now, is not that I came here with my attorney, I came here with someone to help me remember all the details, because we are doing some events, we're not doing 52 weeks. One of the things I said to Susanna when we first talked about helping me with some of these things is I don't want them every Friday and Saturday night. I want it to work within our neighborhood and what we're doing, and it has to fit like our business model. I guarantee you, it's not going to be April, May, and June, because that's when we're busy. It's a supplemental income because we're a seasonal business and we slow down. So your input matters to me. I'll say that on the record, off the record, I'll say it because you're a neighbor, and I'd be happy to have a conversation with you any time about it,
Yeah.
whether it's a board-related thing or anything, but I haven't heard anything except for 2 neighbors. And I know that last one was loud, and I was happy to have a conversation. I told everyone to listen, I would be happy to have a conversation.
Yeah, well, you can, you know where I live.
Yep.
So you can come
Right.
over anytime, and that.
But I didn't have the complaint with you did with me, so I'm just saying.
No, but you knew it was loud, and it
did.
was.
I did, yeah.
So I just don't think that that's the right spot for amplified music. And
Okay.
I think that what is going to happen is this year there'll be 3 weddings, and next year there'll be 8 weddings, and the next year there'll be, you've hired someone to plan the events for you. So it's part of your business model, and I don't know that that's what the garden shop was zoned to be, or what the neighbors moved into a neighborhood to have it like. So,
Okay.
and I know I'm the cranky old person out here saying this, but if any one of you lived next door, you would know it firsthand also. And it's just not, for a regular occurrence, it's just not what should be happening in that residential area. So, if these people are booked and they don't mind having acoustical stuff, then I certainly don't want to do this. But my fear is next year you're going to come back with 10, and next.
I'm pretty sure going in here, I wasn't going to be booking 10 after what you guys told me, and that's why I came here, and that's why I came here early.
Yeah.
So I'm not really arguing with you.
let's
To be
do
honest,
this.
I'm not fighting. Like I
No,
said,
no.
I didn't bring my
I
attorney.
know. If you could, Chris, just, between now and our next meeting, I'm happy to put you back on the agenda to have a discussion, but I need to know what the interpretation of the zoning/use by the building enforcement officer, the zoning enforcement officer, because then that puts me into the use issue. Once I can settle the use issue, then I can deal with the license, but until then, I'm kind of stuck, that's all.
Okay?
Anybody else? No? And they'll put you at the beginning of the agenda too, so you don't have to wait around, all right?
Thank you.
All right. Chris, Susanna, thank you very much.
Thank you all.
All right, going to move on to 640 discussion roadway drainage. Kevin, this is a contract, is it 2 contracts or just one for 2 different locations?
It'll be one contract.
For 2 different locations, Gilson Road, Bailey's Causeway. These are basically culverts that are going to be replaced, enlarged to allow further, I guess you could say, drainage and flushing from the marshes, so the water that comes in, they can get it out quicker when it's flooding.
Exactly.
or
It's been a
storm
long
surge.
time coming, design-wise, and we've been over a year in permitting for these projects. We got all our permits back, we went out to bid, and we had we had a good show of bids. It's actually the first time I've ever seen it, we actually had a tie. So, the 2 low bidders were Aqualine and Maverick Construction, so we went through their references, checked every job, a lot of the jobs that they had done, and we couldn't find any fault between the 2 of them. They each were well-qualified contractors, so we had spoken to, we called up the bid unit law district attorney and found out, what's the best way of handling it, so it came down to a coin flip.
I was going to say toss a coin.
We did a coin flip, and Aqualine was the lucky winner. So we plan on awarding the contract to Aqualine. They did work on some of our pump stations, and they did good work, so we feel comfortable with it.
Good. Questions from the board?
There's no opportunity to go back and ask them to rebid, fight each other? That doesn't work that way?
No, I mean, we had prices as high, we had 12 bidders, we had some as high as $976,000. They were at $470, 2 contractors, so,
Right.
that's a good price. They each said they will never put an even number ever again, it'll always be $470,000 and 1 cent, or 99 cents, or something to that effect, but, so, we had good bids, and
Great.
we had 12 bidders, so we had quite a few people that came out, so we were pleased with it. So we're actually looking forward to getting work done.
This would get started when?
Basically, we gave Aqualine the notice of intent to award pending this meeting, so they're already getting their bonding and insurance and everything else together to start the project.
Okay.
Once they get that to us and we have approval from the selectmen, we'll award the contract. So ideally, we could get it done, early spring.
I was going to say prior to summer, or just only,
Well, I'd want to try to get it done as soon as possible.
Good.
And we've already talked to police and fire about shutting down the road for a while. There'll be detours involved.
that's the reason why I asked, because of the summer, that'll create a log jam both on Gilson as well as
Yeah, no
Bailey's
doubt,
Causeway.
no doubt. So ideally, the contract is, at least I spoke to the owner of Aqualine the other day, and he's looking for work. So I think
Good.
he'd be putting his top guys on it to put in the work right away and get the work done.
Any questions from the board?
Just how long will the construction be?
So he told me
All goes well?
he thinks he could do each culvert in 4 weeks. So I think it'll take longer than that. That's a very optimistic view. You're probably looking at 6 weeks, and if they don't have any problems, it could go a little longer. But if they do precast, it might go quicker. They'll divert the water. And the only other thing, we had $400,000 approved at the April 17 meeting, and we're going to use $70,000 from our roadway budget to balance the projects out to do the culverts.
Sean?
Will that include asphalt?
Yes.
Right, all right, okay.
Just for that area, it's not going to pave.
No,
just
but
for the-
finish, so, all right, okay.
Yep, lock, stock, and barrel.
And there'll be a total shutdown, there's gonna have to be a total shutdown of the road.
We'll have to completely do
And then-
a shutdown. We have a
so-
traffic plan set up, and
Right,
we'll do all the alerts.
I mean, overnight and probably, some days on end, I would
Traffic,
think.
it'll probably be shut down for, 2 or 3 weeks. It's not gonna be, it won't be
Right.
open to traffic. And it could be the whole 6 weeks, depending on what their configuration is.
Okay, and then tides and storms, just, they have to watch,
Something we always watch, yep.
okay.
The Gilson culvert's pretty plugged up right now. I mean, we dig it out, but it's collapsed and in rough shape. One other
Where
thing,
is that exactly?
Just before Kim Donovan's house,
So,
right before you turn left on Town Way.
right
I
before.
looked at it
Yep.
15 years ago, a resident had me there, and it's a metal culvert that's collapsed, so. what they're gonna put in will last a long time, especially if they get it from like Marshfield, so. They do this a lot, box culverts.
So you're going to close Bailey's Causeway for 6 weeks?
Have to reroute it down, Glades, is it, or what's the?
Yeah, we'd have to keep it a two-way at Glades,
Yeah,
depending
two-way.
on when it's done.
Yep.
Will there be notices to the neighborhoods?
No. Yeah, yes, yes, of course. We'll make sure we
Let me
get everybody
rephrase,
involved.
Kevin.
Yes, we'll make sure everybody's
There
aware.
will there will.
There will be.
Did you say that's going to be in the summer?
We're shooting to get the work started as soon as possible. The biggest hang-up we'll have is we'll get the shop drawings for the culverts in. Once that is approved, the time to get them built, and then we'll be looking to get it placed.
Is your projection the summer?
It could go as far as the summer. We're trying to shoot it and get it completed in the spring.
Because the summer's going to be a problem, isn't it?
July, starting July it will, but if you can get it started April, May, it can be done 8 weeks, that puts you to July before the 4th.
Are you doing them at the same time?
Oh, actually,
Probably-
the two of them, no, they're not, they're gonna
We'll do one at a
separately.
time. So we'll see.
Yeah, so you're
As
gonna
I said,
start
the owner of the company said he thinks he can do them in 4 weeks, each one, lock, stock, and barrel. So there may be overlap on that. You may be finishing one up while you're taking the other one out. We'll have all the schedules completed and put together, but our idea is to have it done before summer.
Should we postpone to the fall?
I think the costs go up, or do they, what do they, do they?
It would. Cost up, yeah. He's ready to go, so.
Yeah.
Once you have the schedule, though, we should definitely have that posted on the website as well.
Yep, we'll post it and make sure it's out. And I know a lot of the neighbors in the Gilson area are definitely looking forward to that culvert being replaced.
Yeah, you're gonna need to have a really good, like, maybe, what's his name? Web guy. Who's our web guy?
Tom Rose?
Bill?
Bill. To put up something about updates on construction between Bailey's Causeway, Gilson Road, Turner Road, Oceanside,
Yeah, it's a good idea.
Gannett Road, so that people will understand this is where the construction is. And maybe they're off a day or two, but at least they know
Yep,
what's
and we
happening.
have traffic plans and detour plans
Good.
and everything all set that we can post on the website.
Yep.
And like anything, we'll put our message board up at the dump and or at the transfer station. It gets the best,
It does.
best
That's smart.
notice.
Once these guys get started, they're gonna wanna get this done. It's, it's, price is the price.
For a
If they
company
drink-
like this,
yeah, right.
they're coming in at what I consider a lower price. I was actually worried we were only gonna be able to do one of them and not both of them, because I thought the prices were gonna be too high, because the
Yep.
prices have been escalating. I think they're coming in to get the work done, and they've got, foremen that are sitting around waiting to do the work, and if they can get it all done this spring, they will. Just depends on the turnaround time on the shop drawings and everything else.
Wait till they get down to like June and the harbor and Beauty and lunch, they might slow down a little bit, All right, can I get a motion? Somebody move okay, go ahead.
Move that the Board of Selectmen award the culvert replacement on Gilson Road and Bailey's Causeway to Aqualine Utility, Inc. for up to $470,000.
Motion by Ms. Canfield, seconded by
Second.
Mr. Harris, all in favor?
aye.
Kevin,
Thank
thank
you very
you.
much.
Thank you.
Mr. Cafferty.
All right. God bless you.
That happens in all of
We're going to move on now to the 6:50 presentation of the Scituate Public Schools Elementary School Facilities Report by Habib and Associates. God bless.
And we're on time. Oh, crap.
Is it possible for me to project what they have?
Yes.
It is possible, it's a question whether we want to do it or not, but yes, we can. No, we do
You
actually.
got to plug in that HDMI? Yeah. Yep.
Cam, can you get this on the,
It's at 6%.
perfect, thank you.
Here we go.
All right, stay over there for crying out loud, I'm trying to fight a cold right now. Where's Maura when you need her? I've done like in box culverts before.
That's Scituate.
Those be like corrugated steels out there, or are they
Yeah,
cement?
you should see them. They're huge. They're 8 inches thick. These box culverts, they bolt them all together. but they use a crane to set them and all that. It should go quick.
I want to go through I want to take a tour of the water treatment plant this week or next week.
VGA or computer?
And that company, Aqualine, the square away company.
Excuse me. Is the Habib port in this, or do I have to find it?
You can look at this. Lorraine printed it for me if you want. If we don't have it, we might have it. She printed it. I didn't even have a chance to look at it.
I looked at it. I just wanted to see if
If we need to, we can. Go ahead.
So first, thank you all for having us today. Certainly be brief with your time. Before I introduce Steve Habib and his team, I'd like to just take a minute to share the context for this presentation with the board again today. So I came on board with the school department about 1.5 years ago, and some of the first feedback as I did my listening tour with community members and families were concerns about predominantly Cushing and Hadley elementary school facilities. A lot of those concerns were shared to me anecdotally. Mr. Griffin were worried about the floors, were worried about the windows, were worried about a roof. And so we took some time that year to ask the questions, how do we comprehensively evaluate the needs of these facilities? After thinking long and hard about that, as part of the FY19 capital plan proposal, we put forth a recommendation that was ultimately agreed to and supported by the town to do this comprehensive evaluation of ultimately our 3 oldest buildings. Cushing, Hadley, which had been the ones we'd been hearing from community members and family members a lot about, as well as the Wampatuck Elementary School, which is back in 1957, but has seen a lot of renovations and repairs. We did that work because we wanted to make sure we were guided with whatever next steps are taken by data, and that data helps us determine pragmatic and comprehensive solutions to facilities needs and not patchwork solutions. So I'm here today to introduce Habib and Associates, who are the company who did the engineering and architectural analysis as well as the educational analysis for us, and share a little bit about some potential next steps with the committee. So with that, I'll turn it over to Steve Habib, who will introduce his team.
Great, thank you, Superintendent. With me is Jack Shea, educational planner, and Jeff Puleo, who is a demographics and planner and architect as well. So, as was explained, and if you go to the next slide, we can see a little bit about the firm. We've been in existence for over 20 years. I've been working on public educational facilities for a little over 40 years. Jack comes from an educational background, actually was an elementary school teacher and then administrator, principal, curriculum director. And over the past 3 or 4 years, Jack's been with me and has become certified as a full educational facility planner through A4LE, which is the International Organization of Educational Facility Planners. Jeff Puleo has 30 years plus experience and has been working on this project, more specifically in the area of the demographics. And Jeff is on the planning board in Hanover and knows how to develop what would be appropriate enrollment projections. So we're going to talk about that. Our assignment by the school department had 4 components. The first was to estimate the enrollment projections moving forward. This is for grades pre-K through grade 5. To examine the physical conditions of the 3 older elementary school. The Jenkins was not looked at from a physical condition perspective. The other 3 elementary schools were. We assessed the educational adequacy of those 3 schools, and in so doing, looked at the capacity of the Jenkins as well, because the options that, 4th element, developing options, had to take into account also students at Jenkins. So it's a comprehensive review of your pre-K through grade 5 student population and organization. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jeff.
So I think one of the first things that we were tasked to do is really assess the potential growth in Scituate. There were reports that we were received to start our efforts that showed that there was a declining population in Scituate and a declining population within the school system that we did a deep dive into, especially in the pre-K through 5, that orange line. And you can see towards 2015, it took a really deep dive. And previous state reports indicated it was going to stay level and not grow. But you've made improvements in the schools. You built the new middle school. And school principals and administrators recognized an influx of students coming back to the public schools from BC High, other private college, high schools. And so that was an indicator to us that something wasn't right with the reports. So we looked at live births. We looked at development potential within the town. We had several discussions with your town planner. We looked at the Donahue report from UMass Amherst that suggested the South Shore was, it's not a hugely growing population, but it is growing at about 1.5% on a 5-year. And so we looked at these statistics and we came back and suggested that, you're making improvements, students are coming back to public schools within Scituate, and we don't agree that, that declining population is going to continue. We think you're going to have an increase, and based on the research that we did, we projected 1.5% based on enrollments from 2015, and suggested different enrollment that you currently have. So it means more pressure on classroom size, number of classrooms, and different components. Jack and
How does that compare to towns like Hanover, Norwell, Hingham, Duxbury, as far as the age goes? Because these communities are very similar to ours in that they would, I'm looking at the 2007, 2008, 2009 as being the recession years, where probably people were thinking less about having more children because of the economies. So, I mean, how do we compare to surrounding towns with that same projection?
Economy has a lot to do with population growth.
Right.
We all know that. And it also has a lot to do with the enrollment in public schools, because as the economy drops, public schools increase, right? The enrollment. I can only tell you from when I first moved to Hanover, it was I've been there for 10 years. The high school debate has been ongoing. They built the high school, it's open now for 5 years? 5 years. And the day it opened, it was undersized, right? It was undersized because they designed this great curriculum that was more of a STEM-based education that integrated engineering, technology, and a lot of students came back from public schools and entered the school system. They wanted to go to Hanover. They wanted to be with their neighbors, their friends.
Thank you for lowering my chair.
Anecdote. Doesn't mean it's going to happen here. Is it likely? Possibly.
Could I add another layer to that too? So one of the reasons that we asked Habib and Associates to do this work certainly was to give us a comprehensive look at the schools in general, but it's also ultimately to form a basis for a statement of interest, which is the beginning of a process, not the end of the process, over the next 5 to 7 years, to either do major renovations or replace a building. If we were to get accepted through the MSBA, which is the Massachusetts School Building Authority, they would do another analysis here as well to try to corroborate the projections. We recognize that all enrollment is just that, it's projections, but we want to get as close as we can so that we're not building too much facility or renovating too much facility. And to your point, you're not finding that you've built a facility or renovated a facility that ultimately doesn't fit the number of students and families that you have.
Right, and ultimately, the growth is not
It's modest.
20 classrooms, it's a classroom or two. It's not, and I think we'll get into.
Can I just ask one question on that? Remind me, Ron, we had projections not that long ago that showed declining. Where were those from?
They were the Cropper Institute. Ironically, if you take a look at this chart here, they were done going into 2016. So they were done at the end of that decline.
Yeah.
And what you see on the board there are actuals, not enrollments.
Right.
And the enrollments actuals have been leveled off. And in kindergarten, first grade, and second grade, they've been up by about 2 classrooms for us, so 35, 40 students. So those are our actuals on the ground right now. And one of the things we asked Habib to do is to take a look at the live birth data, which projects how many students are going to be in our kindergartens in 4 and 5 years. And we're finding that we're adding about 40 to 50 students in addition to those students who are born in Scituate each year annually. And we believe that's one of the reasons that we'd be looking at modest growth going forward.
And a couple of other developments in town. Probably there were 3 multifamily developments in town. One of them is over 55. One of them is a high-end community, and one of them is mixed development. And I talked to the developers and the town planner about what their anticipation for, what does that mean for the schools, right? And they didn't have a really good answer, and a lot of them were like maybe 10. Maybe 15, maybe 20. But it really depends on who ultimately comes, right? 2 to 3 bedrooms, 1 development. The high-end development over by the train station, Greenbush, is going to be 1 or 2 development condos. The over 55, I expect 0, right? So we factored that into our assessment as well.
Thank you, Jim.
This slide speaks to the...
Sorry to interrupt. Did you take into consideration the 250 apartments that may go on?
Yeah. Yes, we did. And the apartments, it really depends on the mix, and the town planner really had good advice that it was 10% of the apartments were going to be affordable with 3 bedrooms. So 250, 10% of those, 25. 3 bedrooms, you're going to have 1.5 children of a range of age that move in. And are they elementary or are they high school? Speaking from my experience in Hanover, they're in between the middle school and high school, right?
You don't have to go, as long as you took, that's the biggest thing that could
Yes.
impact it. So if you
Yes.
took it into consideration, then.
Thanks. This slide speaks to the distribution of the elementary pre-K through grade 5 population. So you can see that in the first grade area, the distribution of 6-year-olds is not evenly distributed between buildings. We have no control over where children are distributed throughout the town. And the school system, as a result, has difficulty managing those numbers and keeping class size within the guidelines that the school committee has established. So that's just that slide. As we look through it...
Well, can you go back? What's the circles? You had the 2 circles, 41, 71.
They are somewhat the outliers in terms of a low point and a high point within a grade. So you can see 41 is a low within first grade, and 71 is a high of the same age group.
And when was the last time we redistricted?
We haven't sought to be district with John McCarthy.
So I want to say 4 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago was the last redistricting. It was soft in that.
What does that mean?
Entire redistricting. It means a handful of streets were appropriated to different schools and grandfathered in. So the next people that came in, the next person moved in went to a different school than the person perhaps near them. And so any major renovation or new facility would require and necessitate some level of redistricting so that your distribution of students is more equitable.
And how many empty classrooms are there in Jenkins? Because that's 349, that's pretty low for Jenkins, what it was built for.
50, yeah.
Yeah, so it was built for just over 500. It was at some points, though, up to 650.
Right.
Which is maybe over capacity as well.
Right.
There's 3 classrooms that are currently not used for what I call traditional education in any capacity. They're used for other facility needs across the board. So those you would count as not being used. They're in use, but they're not used for educational purposes, right? Storage and those sorts of things.
Thank you, Rob. And then this gives you an idea of the class size guidelines as established by grade. There's a slight variance as they progress through, increasing that. And you can see the current number of sections as well as the average class size and that distribution, that the school system does a great job in adhering to those guidelines through each of the 4 elementary schools. And this is what Jeff spoke to earlier in terms of looking at the live birth rate. The extension of this line is looking at the children that are 0 through age 4 that will be entering the school system. And you can see there's a slight uptick. That is adding that 45 students, which is about the average, as we've looked historically over the years, from the time of that live birth rate to the time they enroll. Reasons for that are conceivably, it's time we have a family, let's move to the community we want to, they're ready to start kindergarten. So you'll look at that time from 0 to age 4 of an in-migration of some young families.
There we are. Okay, so the second element of our study had to do with assessing the 3 existing older schools, the Cushing, the Hatherley, and the Wampatuck. And when we do our assessment, we break it down into 5 major areas. Those are listed up on the top building envelope, which also includes energy efficiency, building interiors, mechanical and fire protection, electrical, fire alarm, data security, and last but not least is the site. So in looking at the overall summary of all 3 schools and looking at 3 different scopes, we break each deficiency down into one of those scopes. There's roughly $37.5 million projected in deficiencies that need to be addressed sometime moving forward. And that cost includes a 4% per annual inflation factor. It also includes contingencies and soft costs, administrative, and fees of the like. The Cushing building, very similar to Hatherley, you'll see just under $13 million identified in deficiencies over the 3 options, over the 3 categories, I should say. And you can see some of the issues that exist. If you look at the lower left, you'll see that shows temporary classrooms that were put in some 20 years ago, designed to be in use for 4 or 5 years, and they're still on site. Significantly outdated electronics, electrical systems and control systems. You'll see in the lower left, you'll see a portable air conditioner. The maintenance group has been very creative in doing what they need to in order to continue to be able to use the facilities as they're intended. On the right, you'll see a doorknob, which is no longer in compliance with the code, and a custodial space on the left. That's already done. Again, Hatherley, very similar to Cushing, just under $13 million identified. You can see the age. The schools are well maintained. This is very typical for buildings that are over 50 years old, schools, and what they will look like. What we don't see are those items behind the walls, the piping, the plumbing, the heat pipes.
those are beyond the end of their useful life, and they're going to consistently begin to start leaking in greater amounts. Again, a temporary classroom that really was put on 20 or so years ago.
Can I just interrupt you one second? So the numbers you're saying, so if we went in and spent $37 million on these buildings, we'd end up with renovated buildings exactly in the same educational model that we have.
Correct. No
Okay.
added space.
I just wanted to
no-
state that.
Yeah, right. It's just to take the buildings as they exist and bring them up to current
Bring them up to-
code, not
okay.
from an educational perspective. strictly.
What is scope 1, 2, and 3?
Scope 1, if we go back to the very first one, right here, those are items that are necessary, but they may not be critical
I see.
yet. For instance, you have a roof that, maybe it's 20 years old. Well, it's getting close to the end of its useful life. It's not yet critical, but you need to budget for it within the next several years. Is that recommended?
I got it.
Would be things like air conditioning.
And the intention of that, when we worked with Beaven Associates, was that we not only identify what we need right now, but that we're proactively planning for the needs of the schools into the future as well, and can lean on this data multiple times when needed.
I think Wampatuck we talked about, or we, on the numbers. Again, it's, 60 years old, 60-plus years old, and it's just has some tired systems and structures. Jack, this is
Yes.
your end.
Looking at the educational adequacy, that's where we're looking at the programmatic match. How does the space support what's happening inside the building? And since these buildings were constructed, education has changed radically. Each year, there are changes that incrementally are influencing that space and putting demands on the spaces. So you can see since the year, there was a gymnasium that we just saw in the last picture in Wampatuck. A gymnasium today and the activity level that the MSBA, the Mass School Building Authority, says, a gymnasium should be basically twice the size of that gymnasium. On top of it, that gymnasium is adjacent, well, in Cushing and in Hatherley, they're adjacent to classrooms. They open right into the gymnasium. So we can look at those spaces and say they are really not adequate for delivering instruction. You know, that's the thing that we're looking at in terms of the spaces working. The program is great. You've got very talented staff here that are making do within the spaces they have, but they have inadequacies within the spaces that they are working.
If I
So-
could just interject and just underscore something Ms. Canfield said, a renovation, as you described, would bring them up to code, but it would maintain that we'd have classrooms abutting the gymnasium, and again, great staff doing great work. It's a real challenge to deliver the kind of program we're looking to do when the balls are bouncing off the wall and the door and so on.
That's right. When you look at programs that have been added since these buildings were constructed, the integration of students with special needs, offering speech and language services, looking in terms of OT and PT, those things were not included when these buildings were originally constructed. You have to carve that out. It puts more demands on the space, or they're in inadequate spaces that might be hallways or closets or things of that nature. So looking at the egg crate designs of these buildings, you can see that the programs have changed, but yet this very rigid structure is there with gymnasiums, you know, in the center. The media centers are libraries. Using with the instrumental program, the cafeterias are used and the platforms within the cafeterias so that when lunch happens, you have to shut that program down. There's no dedicated space to be able to do instrumental music instruction.
So the gymnasium space that Jack was just talking about is that pink space on the upper left in the floor plan. And you can see the number of classrooms that are entering directly onto it. And similarly, at Hatherley, on the right-hand side, you get 6, 7 classrooms opening onto the gym.
No, it will.
And Wampatuck, you can see the gym on the left. That's the photo that we saw with classrooms on each side of it. So the fourth element of our study was to develop planning options. And we developed 6 options, each of which will meet the needs from an educational perspective, and the costs have been calculated out based on a projection of 5 years. And something to keep in mind is that typical project of this nature, one project alone, if things go smoothly, entering an SOI into the state, into the MSBA, and then carrying it through. If everything goes smoothly, that's about a 5-year process until you actually occupy a building. So what we have are some different grade configurations. If we look at the first three, actually, are neighborhood schools where it would take all of the students pre-K through grade 5. Option 1 would have 4 buildings. Option 2 and 3 would have 3 buildings. And you can see the difference there would be the additions and renovations in option 2 would happen to Wampatuck and either Cushing or Hatherley. So there would be one of those schools, they'd be combined so that there would be just one school between those two.
Steve, key on the top is critical.
Oh, yeah, the key on the top, thank you, Jeff, keys you into what is existing, what is an addition, or what is new in terms of buildings.
So the option 1 is 3 new additions.
3 additions, right, so those would be added on and renovated.
As well as renovation of existing structure?
That's correct.
Okay.
And the reason for the addition is, for example, on Wampatuck, it wouldn't be increasing the amount of classroom space, but the new gymnasium would be necessary for MSBA.
And getting rid of the modulars, I would suspect?
Yes, getting rid of the temporaries.
Yes.
Right, yep.
The temporaries are not calculated in to the capacity of the buildings because they just, at this point, they shouldn't be. So you can see the top 3, first 1, 2, and 3 are neighborhood school organizations. The bottom 3 have town-wide organizations for some of the grades. Now, option 4 would group pre-K through 1 town-wide, and then grades 2 through 5 in Wampatuck and Jenkins. And there are pros and cons to these organizations, educationally as well as operationally. The 5th option would house grades pre-K through grade 2 in one new building, and then grades 3 to 5 in Wampatuck and Jenkins. And it's interesting to note that that particular option takes care of the majority of the sins with one construction project. The addition on Wampatuck in that option would be very, very modest. It would be a gymnasium and maybe a classroom, a specialty classroom. And in option 6, it does a little bit different. It takes town-wide grades 3 to 5 in one new building, and then converts Wampatuck and Jenkins to be pre-K through 2, through grade 2. Something to keep in mind with respect to that option is that neither Wampatuck or Jenkins in their current configuration have adequate numbers of classrooms that are appropriate for pre-K and K, pre-kindergarten and kindergarten. Because those classrooms, they need more area, they need to be larger, they need to have toilet facilities right there with them. So there would have to be some internal modifications if that was handled in that.
Can I just jump in, Steve?
Sure.
On your additions and remodeling, the different examples, are you proposing to increase the footprint or work within the footprint?
No, the additions would require adding to the footprint.
So like
In each case.
All right.
And if I could interject something here that I think is good context. These options are designed to really just give us a direction. Right? We recognize this is a need. We've had a lot of anecdotal information. This is a need. We also appreciate this is a 5 to 7 year process. This doesn't happen overnight. I also recognize the town has lots of other needs as well, so I want to honor that and recognize that too. This is intended simply to say, here's a direction that we think we can take. Let's get some hard, concrete data that's comprehensive about all of our needs and start down the path of exploration. The intention from the school department's perspective is to take a look at these options. One of the options that we're most interested in is option 3, which would allow us to have a new facility that meets not only the structural and engineering needs for a facility, but also build for the educational needs that our Scituate Public Schools have been doing now and want to continue to innovate for in the future. And start the process through a statement of interest that simply says, we would like to pursue this. That can change over time with input from this community, with input from this board and our school committee, our taxpayers, and the MSBA. So we recognize this is a long process and there's lots of needs, and our intention with identifying options is just to be upfront, transparent with what we need to do and create some data so we can identify what those needs are on paper.
And I do want to point out, the costs that are included over on the right are for, any additions, new construction, as well as the full renovations of the existing buildings.
One other thing to note, if I can
And
just
demolition,
add.
I would imagine, too, right?
Including demolition.
Yep, for one.
For one,
Right, facilities. One other thing I just briefly note, I know we're
Or
running
two.
short on time, so I want to be respectful of your time, is that anytime you see that dark building, that means a project, be it a large renovation or something new. And anytime we do those, typically a community would want to work with the MSBA. Each one of those is a 5 to 7 year lead time. So for example, when you look at option 1, that's 3 5 to 7 year lead times. Put a statement in, potentially get picked up, go through that process with several other studies, get some renovation done, add, rinse, repeat. So I just want to name that that's the only caveat to also, that we've been keeping in the back of our minds, and that may not jump out at you with the graphic.
Very good.
At any of these scenarios, though, essentially the existing building would end up being gutted because the functional space isn't,
The existing which building?
the existing space of, if there's an addition on one of the existing buildings. The current space pretty much has to be gutted, is what you're saying?
No, it wouldn't be fully gutted. The mechanical and electrical systems would be totally removed and replaced, but it wouldn't necessarily involve significantly.
It wouldn't reconfigure the classrooms
Radical,
inside necessarily.
right.
It wouldn't move the classrooms away from a gymnasium necessarily.
It might there might be a different use for that gymnasium space.
Right, that space might get,
That would
okay.
be
More appropriate.
more appropriate, right. It could be a quiet space. It could be carved up to serve the needs of the resource rooms, for instance, which are smaller group rooms for instruction, specialized instructions and the like. So that's how I would see that occurring.
Yeah, well, that, I think that begs, so there's no obviously, it's very complicated, but if it's a 5 to 7 window and we know we have these issues and we know there's some buildings that, there are places in the building that maybe we can, talk about doing a faster sequencing without wasting time and money. I mean, I know that's outside of the scope of this, but
Yeah,
what I'm saying is,
I'm trying to.
we know that.
You mean do some smaller projects on your own without MSBA involvement?
Yeah, does that compromise getting funding from them if you start touching stuff like that?
No, not necessarily, but the expense is substantially more dramatic. So when the MSBA involved, if you look at some of those costs, they
Right.
take a large proportion of those costs. And even if you broke it up into smaller amounts, if you didn't work with the MSBA, you wouldn't get any reimbursement from them, and it would be entirely on the community. So some communities do that. I would encourage us to try to use that process because it's the resources of the entire state coming together to support, in this case, Scituate, any community.
Percentages the same, Ron, as they have been since we did the new?
There's
all
no
shaking its head.
statewide change in that percentage, but that would be determined once we enter the process.
Still around 40. Okay.
I think
It
have been,
varies.
they've been talking about revisiting that in the state legislature. I don't know how far along. Have you heard anything from MSBA, Jeff? I mean, from
Nothing
Masmo?
definitive. It's ongoing discussion, but to really put a hard, fast number, I wouldn't be prepared to give you that.
Rich?
Right, I know Mr. Canfield is probably thinking with all this construction, how does it affect the kids who are in the school when the construction's happening? That's why one of the options that seems to be the most favorable, number 3, is building a new school while all the schools are still in session. So you wouldn't be interrupting necessarily the education of the kids in those buildings. When that school is finished, then you can close the 2 schools. And that was
Actually,
how I know the addition one would still always be a problem.
Actually, I was more actually wondering if there's a way that's not harmful to the process to get improvements. If under every scenario we're looking at keeping Wampatuck, is there something before 5 to 7 years we can start thinking about doing to renovate the existing space there? Because if we know we're headed down these roads, and you've demonstrated that there's recommended and down the pike, that rather than put that all off until we figure out everything 5 to 7 years, that maybe we should accelerate, especially when it comes to Wampatuck, if that looks like a building that's going to retain, is start thinking about that without compromising our financial picture down the road.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly, and it's actually part of the facilities and capital plan that we have for the next 5 years that has contingency, not just for Wampatuck, but for Cushing and Hadley as well. So MSBA is not a guaranteed process. We recognize that Boston is in the mix as well, and they've got buildings that are 200 years old. So we acknowledge that it's a norm process, and they take the ones that have the highest need. And we want to make sure that if we don't get selected this year, we continue to work at it, no question about it, but that we put plans in place to continue to upgrade, maintain, and improve the facilities that we have, with emphasis on Wampatuck, because as you can see, all of those would be, all the plans would incorporate some continued major renovations.
Maura?
When is the opening of that MSBA process, and where are you and the school committee with regards to what option you're leaning towards? Has that been discussed?
It's already open, the process is open. It's
Okay.
the reason that we timed this as we did. It's also the reason that we've presented it all to you today. So we're in the process of drafting an SOI, which is just a statement of interest. It doesn't commit any money in any way. But part of an SOI, when you do it for an elementary school set, requires that you think about these configurations as well as enrollment. So we needed this, not just the engineering data, but the configuration options as well, because you have to make a statement of interest for something. It doesn't mean you have to necessarily follow that for the next 5 to 7 years, but it's a step toward that direction for leadership to give us that, that step forward. So the SOI that we're developing is going to be for option 3, which would be a new facility that would replace the Cushing and the Hadley. It does not have an SOI yet for the Wampatuck, because again, 5 to 7 years for one, complete, next SOI for another. They have to be phased. They won't take 2 buildings simultaneously, typically. I was just on the phone with the MSBA today. The other part of that process is important, is that an SOI has to be approved by a school committee and ultimately by, bless you, by your town Board of Selectmen. And so in about a month, I'll be coming back to you to share with you the content, executive summary of the SOI that we would propose to submit. And that's part of the requirement by the MSBA, that the school committee is on board and that the town is ultimately on board. Again, I can't emphasize enough, I know there are a lot of needs in our community. I know we're trying to prioritize all those needs. The intention here really is just to set a direction, offer some leadership about where we can go, and start a long-term process. And so approving an SOI doesn't commit any of those resources in any way, simply says, yes, go explore this.
Tony? Any questions?
No, I mean, I think we've all been in the schools, we all know what they look like pretty well, so I don't think this is surprising to any of us. It's really getting funding to help support it, and I know Nancy will look at our current debt schedule and see when Jenkins falls off, or when some of the existing ones, to see if there's a good meld for it. I mean, I think we have to prepare to replace our buildings after a certain number of useful years, whether it's 50 years or 70 years or 100 years if it's Gates. But at some point in time, that's got to be the bigger picture. So,
And if I could just add one last thing, the intention of this is to try to be proactive, so that we're not up against it saying, we have this litany of items that we can't afford to get all at once, knowing that there's lots of priorities still.
Yeah, thanks. I agree with Tony, but I would like, as a part of your discussion and your deliberation with regards to option 3, is to consider, you know, when you consider where you're going to put that one school, that one new school, what are you going to do with the other piece of property? Because I think we have a habit of taking care of one nut and not the other, and I would like to have that discussion as well to understand, okay, what is the intention of that property that you're ultimately going to bring completely offline, right? Whether it's Cushing or, I suspect it's between Cushing and Hatherley. So just to have that as a part of the discussion as well, so we all understand what's going to be encumbered to take care of that property as well.
Some collaboration so that we
Yeah.
have a good plan that uses the town's limited space effectively.
On option 3, Ron, you really don't have too many choices, do you? I mean, you don't have an extra plot of land next to Cushing, do you? It's really Hatherley that you have the extra space that you really could keep both schools open while you built a new school next to Hatherley.
I mean, quick look at the Scituate map, there is just not a lot of space. We acknowledge that Hadley does have more space certainly than the Cushing plot would have. That being said, that's a little premature, and there'd be a feasibility study to really do a deep dive on the spaces that are available and make the best recommendation for where a school building would be, especially because that feasibility would also take into account analyses of, is it 1 floor or 2? And if it's 2 stories, it's a smaller footprint, and where's a smaller footprint, you know, fit, land. So there'd be some of that analysis, there'd be a RFP that goes out to have a firm do that work for us as well. But certainly back to the envelope, when you look at our map, there really is limited space, and Hadley certainly has more space than Cushing would.
Has anything, well, Rich and Paul, you were on the town side, has this process, well, maybe it's too early, has this process changed much since we did the junior high school?
Not dramatically.
Okay, all right.
If you remember, even with the junior high school, we were trying to decide which piece of land we were going to.
Oh, I remember it well, right. Really?
We didn't know exactly from the beginning. I mean, I'm sure everybody sort of had their preference, but at the beginning, we were that school.
Right, right.
Well, the only other thing I might suggest, not suggest, that I would ask, is that the school committee also take a look at, you know, you're projecting 5 to 7 years between potential new elementary school renovation in addition to Wampatuck, but we also have the high school. To Jeff's point, you get people who are going, supposedly coming back to our middle school, but we lose a lot of children to all these other surrounding high schools, and I think it's got to be in the long-term plan as to these projects, if they come to fruition and they get there. Everybody's, after the middle school was open, was they're going from this beautiful school into an older school, and I think that has got to be a part of the discussion so that people understand long-term. You get done, you're going to say, oh, why, by the way, now we got this terrible high school, we need to build it, and now we're looking over $110 million because time value of money, or $120 million, people are going to go bananas. So, and then the other issue I have with that is the concept of, do you tear down and build separately? If the $10 million renovation and ball fields goes through, we don't want to be tearing up the ball fields in 15 years saying that's where the new school's going. And so, I mean, it would have to be something well thought out about tearing down and replacing within the confines of what we have. That's all. I just think it's an important discussion, because if the people who are on the school committee and the people who are on the board of selectmen and people who are the town administrator and superintendent, all of which we might not be here, they might have that discussion, and they say, why didn't they do this back then? That's all.
Could I speak to that briefly for
Sure,
a second?
sure.
So I think it's something that we've been talking a lot about in terms of how do you prioritize what buildings need what ultimately. The MSBA requires you to set a priority project, and so we recognize that in this process, the high school isn't in that loop of the MSBA priority projects. So we've tried to front load all of our capital projects over the next few years, as well as our smaller improvement projects the school department takes on by themselves, focus predominantly on the high school with exactly that in mind. What we don't want to do is put all our energy in one bucket and then find ourselves 10 years later saying, oh man, I wish we had focused some energy somewhere else. So it is something on the radar. It's a challenge to try to balance all of them. We do believe this is the top priority for our school facilities at this time, but we recognize that as a need.
Good. Any questions from the audience? Any questions from the board?
Thank you.
Ron, thank you. Well, you're still staying, but gentlemen, thank you very much, okay?
Thank you, guys.
All right, so we're going to move over to the FY20 budget review, and we're going to start with the school, and then South Shore VOTEC. So Ron, you're here with Paul?
Thanks.
And let me just get back onto the computer here. I shut off.
We have hard copies if you prefer.
I'm
good.
I would, actually,
Yeah.
Yep. because my computer suddenly goes.
I'm all set. I'm good, thank you.
Oh, I have a hard copy.
Oh, you got a hard
Share?
copy? Yeah, I can
I'll
share.
share.
Oh, I have one. Color.
How come you got color? Great.
You're on. There you go.
I'll be brief with your time. I know that we ran a little over on that one, and I want to be respectful of the board's time, so I'll give you a high-level overview of the proposed preliminary FY20 budget, and then certainly open it up to any questions that you might have. And as a primer to this, as we did last year, we'll do again this year once the budget is voted on by a school committee March 11, I believe it is. The document goes up on our website. It's intended, what you see in front of you, is intended to give taxpayers, community members, parents, staff members an understanding of what goes into the budget and the kinds of resources that we use to give every student a high-quality education. So it's written with that group in mind, sort of teacher hat on for me, to help people understand the budget process and be really transparent with the way we use our resources. So the first page just gives you some really high-level overview of the way we structure our budget. What you see in front of you is a combination of operating budget as well as above-level services. What we have currently in the operating budget is a level services budget, different than a level funded budget. It ensures that we maintain all the high-quality educational services for all students, but that there's obviously increases in costs for major contracts and so on. In addition to that level services budget, there's also a recommendation to increase by about $315,000 to meet some needs that we've been working toward over the past few years that we believe we can deliver on in FY20. And I'll get to those, I promise. Your document's broken down into a couple of different things. The process itself, our educational priorities, the way we pay for those educational priorities, funding sources for that, and of course the overview of those recommended additions. The process itself is a zero-based process. We start developing our budget with our team driving the needs. So our leaders, working with our staff members, our department chairs, principals, identifying what the educational needs are in our school district, and then prioritizing those as part of our budget process. Our entire budget for any given year, but certainly for FY20, is built with our 5 priorities in mind that are ultimately the centerpiece of our strategic plan. I might just take a minute to give you a very high-level view of that. Our first priority is about having innovative curriculum. It's 2019, about to be 2020. As Habib and Associates alluded to, education is ever-changing, and it's our job to make sure that we evolve ahead of that curve. It's our goal to innovate in curriculum, to be ahead of that curve, and to be able to be a leader in this region. In order to do that, we're investing in new curricular experiences, things like investments in STEAM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and that creativity of arts as well, developing project-based learning experiences and more. Priority 2 is more about how we teach, and it's ensuring that every student accesses that high-level innovative curriculum. That's students that are struggling in school, that might even be disabled, all the way to students who are gifted and talented and are looking for more engagement and more enrichment as well. It's our job to engage all of those kids, and that's a big part of that Priority 2 work. Priority 3 is a highlight for this budget in particular. We've recognized, not just here in Scituate, but across the Commonwealth, that the need to address students' social and emotional needs in education has grown dramatically in the past decade, and that school districts have to invest in the programming and the staff to make sure that our kids are well-rounded kids, going to be well-rounded adults in an ever-changing and really complex society. Priority 4, you spent a lot of time just taking a look at, so I won't spend too much more time on it, other than to say it's our goal to build flexible environments to do all that education. And priority 5, that arc of work encompasses everything from our international exchange programs to our METCO program, and it's ultimately designed to make sure that our students graduate understanding that they're part of a bigger world and that they've had some exposure to this interconnected world that's gotten a whole lot smaller than it was when I was growing up and we were all growing up. All of those priorities drive our work. I'll talk a little more about those. I won't spend too much time on enrollment. You heard a lot about enrollment, but certainly have opportunity to answer any questions that you have for you. This brings you to page 7. That's our executive summary of our budget overall. When it's all said and done, FY20 is going to be about $42 million to operate our budget for about 3,015 children. There's 3 basic buckets that we think about when we're building a budget. The first is personnel. That's all of our staff. We employ about 515 people in the town, and a large majority of our budget, about 83%, is staffing. The second is contractual services. It's services that may not be able to be provided directly by our staff, but are provided by outside institutions. A large majority of that is for special education, students who may not be able to be served here in Scituate, but their needs are served elsewhere. And lastly, the smallest proportion, just under 13% of our overall budget, is stuff, materials, supplies, and so on. So you can see by page 8, that graphic's a quick snapshot to show you that our focus and our investment is in people. We spend a lot of time just talking about facilities, and facilities are important, but ultimately the building is just a box. And the education that we have for our children starts with the people that give them that education. That's the priority that we invest in. And we want to have great facilities that support our staff members, there's no question about it, but our top priority is to have great staff members. One item that I'll give you as a highlight when you think about that 83% of the budget that's focused on staff, we have about $1.2 million invested in elementary staff members to ensure that we have optimal class sizes. So I'm sure you've read in the papers in other school districts who have 35, 40 children in a kindergarten class, and trying to help teach every one of those kids to read is a struggle. We maintain those optimal class sizes, and we acknowledge that there's an active investment to do exactly that. It doesn't happen by accident. I won't go through every building, but I'll certainly entertain any questions that you might have. It breaks it down in those same groups: personnel, contractual, materials, for each of our schools. It also breaks it down, which I thought is helpful, if you look at page 15, by the district services as well. And those are typically services that the district provides to all schools as a means of being efficient, capitalizing on the size of the school district when it's all said and done. If you go to page 4, which is page 16, section 4, excuse me, it talks a little bit about the funding and the resources that we use to ultimately meet all of those priorities and all of those needs in our school district. Without question, the top supporter of our school district are the people here in town. The large majority of our overall budget comes from our tax base, and we're so appreciative that we've got an incredible group of community members who care a whole lot about our school districts and support it every year. The next page, page 17, just gives you a brief snapshot of our school district compared to school districts around the region and school districts who may not geographically be close to Scituate, but based on their demographics are similar to Scituate and serving similar populations of students as well. And what we have in front of you is called the per pupil allocation. It essentially takes all of those resources I just talked about, the overall budget, and divides it by the number of students you have. You can see that based on districts that are similar to ours, again, in region, and those that are not near us but are serving a similar population of students, Scituate lands somewhere in the middle in terms of its overall allocation of resources per pupil. Quick important note here, that data is, I pull that data each year from the Department of Elementary and Secondary School website. It has a lag to it, so you can see that it says 2018 and 2017. That is the most up-to-date data they release. It's not a typo.
Ron, what's the total enrollment, total enrolled, I guess, and then to the right, what do those columns mean?
Yep, so
Econ, SWD?
it's the percentage of students that are
All right,
economically
okay, I'm sorry.
disadvantaged. It used to be called low income, but it's the same idea. The next is SWD, which is Students with Disability. It used to just be categorized as special education, with the new title for it. And the last is ELL, students who are ultimately learning English as a second language. And it's all in percentages, the percent of the overall enrollment. The next section in part 4 talks a little bit about some of the other sources that our district uses to fund the school district. Certainly the large majority of our overall resource comes from our taxpayers, but our team does a really nice job chasing down state and federal grant money as well. One takeaway that's important to think about when you look at those breakdowns of the different grants that we pursue is that state and federal dollars fluctuate quite a bit because ultimately they're impacted by state and federal changes at the state and federal level. And so these are conservative estimates because we acknowledge that there is usually some substantial change there.
Could I just interrupt, Ron? You know, this is something that I mentioned to Jim, and I know Jim is doing it. We mentioned it to Tricia when she was TA, and that is to try to annually put together all the grants that the school committee, the town, the Board of Selectmen, the towns just in general put together. Because I remember, you know, coming out initially, people were saying, well, why don't we do more grants? Why don't we get, you know, all this funding, federal funding and state funding? I just think it's important that people in town understand that not just on the town side, whether it's for seawalls or whether it's for the police or the fire, just the school and the town collectively gets X amount. It would be nice to have that up there so people understand that we're not just looking for taxes and increasing it, that we have gone out, that people are spending the time trying to find grants that competing against other communities. I just think if we can put that together on one page, it would be very helpful so people understand it. It's helpful for you when you're suggesting let's get a new school building, and it's certainly helpful for the town as a whole to understand that people are really working hard to find money, not just from residents themselves, that's all.
I agree with you. About $2.3 million of our overall budget is from state and federal grants, and that snapshot on page 18 is literally everything that we have access to. On that point, Chairman, it's also important to note, and I keep it on this list, that some of those grant formulas have changed, where Scituate used to have access to them, and they changed the calculation, and based on our demographics, we would no longer have access to them. Other grants dry up, so for example, the full-day kindergarten grant, no one has access to that anymore. We continue to push with our colleagues at Beacon Hill, as well as the Department of Education, to try to get that kind of support rekindled, that interest in that rekindled. So I keep it on there as a reminder to everybody that that's efforts that we continue to have, but at this time we don't have the resource from the state or federal level there. The next couple of pages, again, is designed, just as you had said, Mr. Chairman, to help show taxpayers and community members and families this is what each of the grants are. They all have strings attached to them, so they can only be used for certain things in certain ways. Our team does a really nice job reporting back, so the state and feds have that. You need to give us that resource. But again, if there are any questions about it, I'm certainly field those too. The next page is page 21. Is the last component of the overall budget that I think is helpful for the board to think about and also for our community to think about. That's revolving accounts and offsets. Simply put, these are fees that are charged for different services. Anytime I bring this page up, I start with the same thing, which is in an ideal world, we would not have to charge a single fee for a single service. And if I could wave that magic wand and take every one of these fees away. That being said, it's about $1.3 million in overall fees that are collected that support a wide number of programs across the school district. None of those fees support the entirety of the program that they're for. So for example, kindergarten is the one that bugs me the most. That $520,000 that's projected is just less than half of the overall cost to operate the full-day kindergarten program.
That was going to be my
Where's it?
question. That
Where's
was going to
that?
be my question.
Oh, the top one. Yep, the top
One
one.
over to the right.
Yep.
So that 520,
Is about 40%.
it costs us $1 million to run kindergarten, really?
Well, $1.2 million.
Yeah.
$1.2 million?
Over $1.2 million.
So what's that, 40%?
Yep.
5%.
About 40%.
So that's why I term these as offsets, because it's not the entire amount, but it does offset the overall cost. Again, ideally, we wouldn't charge fees for any of these things, but finding $1.3 million somewhere else is a real challenge, and all of these programs are vitally important to the service that we provide our students. Go ahead. saw a question, Bill, but no.
Nope, it's good.
Just like I did with the grants, there's a breakdown of how each fee is structured, the amount it is, what it's used for, so that community members, family members, taxpayers can understand why the fee is done, run that way, and ultimately what it's used for. The last portion, I feel like I'm making some time up in the air here for you. Page 23 is the beyond level services. So these are top priorities the school district has identified and would like to recommend as part of the preliminary budget going forward. Again, as I said at the outset, these priorities in the budget reflect the priorities in our strategic plan. The first priority is the addition of adjustment counselors in our elementary schools. We currently have 2, but that means those counselors have to split between buildings. And they're brilliant folks who do tremendous work with our kids and our community members and our parents. And it's a real challenge because the focal point of that work is building those deep relationships, working one-on-one with kids, and doing that across 2 buildings is it's doable and it's a challenge. And with the continued clear need for social and emotional intervention as well as proactive support, we feel like this investment goes a long way to help our kids better access that curriculum. The second proposed addition is our language-based classroom teachers, a special educator, language-based services for students that have language-based disabilities. We have a district-wide program currently in elementary school, and some of those students will be graduating to our middle school, but we don't have one of those programs. Having this teacher allows us to build the program and allows those students to stay in our community and not have to be served in other communities or through out-of-district placements. It also means that our district can also serve students from other districts, allowing us to have non-resident tuitions, which will help us support this program and special education in general. The next recommendation is a full-time athletic director. Our athletics programs have grown over the past few years, thanks in large part, I think, to a lot of dedication by our sports teams, our coaches, our families, as well as our current athletic director and our leadership team over at the high school. With that continued growth, our current model is an assistant principal who also has the athletic director hat. And as that has grown, that job has really become 2 full-time jobs. We've got great people doing the work, but it's really just untenable. So it's our proposal to go to a full-time athletic director going forward. That would allow the current assistant principal position to be fully dedicated to the high school, which I think benefits our high school team as well. Our 2 largest cohorts, graduating classes, are now in sophomore and junior year in the entire school district. So the largest population grade is, both of them are in the high school. And it lets someone dedicate their time predominantly to our athletics program. It's our hope that athletics programming can also expand into the middle school, so we're thinking about secondary athletics, not just high school athletics, and that we're giving kids opportunities who may not be the star athlete or the MVP to still do athletics and maybe start those experiences in the middle school and start those experiences to be healthy people, not just highly competitive athletes and winning state championships and so on. So we think this is an investment in the program that we already have and an opportunity to grow it across the board. Lastly, the next proposed investment is in library paraprofessionals. It's 1.2. We currently have 2 library paraprofessionals who are wonderful folks, like our counselors, spread across 2 buildings. It's challenging to get all elementary school students to go to library, have that time to access a book, spark that love of reading, build their digital literacy skills when you've got people splitting between those 2 facilities. So this would allow us to have dedicated folks at each facility and allow elementary students to have access to the library all year long.
Ron, is that a contractual issue? Do teachers, are they, I don't want to use the word not allowed, but when children go to the library during the day, do teachers accompany them, or is it a requirement that there is a paraprofessional there? I know there's some unique things sometimes in a contract, so I'm just trying to understand why.
It's more of a scheduling issue than a contractual issue, so there's no contractual component to the STA contract or the paraprofessionals contract that dictates that during library time, a teacher shall be there or shall not be there. That being said, you need to have someone managing that library experience. And right now we have 1 person split across 2 buildings times 2.
Yep.
And so it limits the amount of time that kids can be in the library just because the management of that space is limited. And we have students doing a trimester rotation in the elementary, which is okay, but my philosophy is for young students, you want to have them have access to books early on, spark that love of reading, and then get to digital platforms as they get older. I mean, my son's in 6th grade. he sees almost every book he reads now on a Kindle. But when he was 4 and 5, it was the hard copy book that got him interested in reading. And I think that's just developmentally appropriate.
Rich?
And it's also sometimes any special subjects are popular when teachers get their appropriate.
Organized around that.
Well, that was kind of my point, yeah.
But it's a scheduling issue, not a contractual issue, so I want to be clear that this addition of paraprofessional is not intended to address a teacher prep issue in any way, but it's intended to hopefully expand the program. And that we would work around the prep issue. We'd actually end up with more people to provide the prep than you would need, which is a good problem to have. The last page is again, sort of executive summary, big picture. It shows you everything that I briefly went through with all the costs, personnel services, contractual services, material supplies, and so on. It also outlines the potential cost for those top priorities, trying to balance that with any potential retirements. These are all preliminary numbers, of course, and replacements there. It outlines the resources from the town contribution, state and federal grants, as well as fees and offsets. And as you can see, we pretty razor thin in terms of our balance. Briefly, the appendices, we've got the financial forecast model, that's back from October. I know we've had subsequent conversations and that's still in discussion. It also, in Appendix B, shows you all of the identified needs across the school district. You can see the 4 that we have proposed as part of FY20 are listed, but it's nice context to get a sense of some of the other things that are also important to our school district that at this time we haven't been able to find a way to get into the budget. It's important to note that typically needs are populated through this prioritization process with our leadership teams across the schools, sometimes for multiple years. The athletic director is a great example. It's been a need for some time. Around here, the adjustment counselors, it's been a need for some time. Library paras, need for some time, people to get it in. So that with you as a preview of maybe things to come in future years potentially, but these are the needs that are proposed to be funded as well as are not. And lastly, this is more for the public. I'd just like to give community members a snapshot of all things Mike when it comes to the school district. So I just add an addendum of the capital plan as well. That was as fast a summary of FY20 as I could give. Certainly bring any, open any questions.
Karen?
Thank you for this thorough analysis. It really helps understand the process. One little question is, on page 13 on the Gates Middle School, there's a dramatic decrease in custodial services.
I can talk about that. Sure.
Yeah, that just seems counterintuitive.
There's a couple of places across the district, if you look at the fine grain in each building, where there's a decrease in custodial supplies in particular. Thanks to Mr. Dillon and Mr. Donovan's work this past year, we consolidated some of our contractual work and our purchasing at the district level. So when you look at the district numbers, you're going to see an uptick there. We'll save money overall by purchasing in bulk and then distribute to the buildings. Overall, it's a net savings, not massive net savings, but we're looking to find any savings we can so that we can dedicate that to education. So you'll see for a large majority of the buildings a decrease. One example in which you'll see an increase in custodial or a lesser decrease in custodial is over at the high school. And that's a reflection of the new floors that we have there. So last year's capital plan, we installed some new flooring, just the first floor. There's additional maintenance that needs to happen there. So there's a lesser decrease in that line.
And the other question I had is, non-resident students, roughly how many are in district right now?
I want to say it's low numbers, but I don't know the exact number.
40, would be 8, because it's about 30 grand each. So right now, it's about 8 projected for next year. It might be a little higher this year. I'd have to ask the SPED director, Diana. I believe we have probably 10, but I think she's projecting only 8 next year. Might be some age outs. I can get you that information. We can.
The work that they do is amazing.
Right.
So it doesn't surprise me that kids are coming in.
It's about $30,000 of non-resident tuition per student, and that ranges depending sometimes on program, but typically.
Tony?
Sure. Just to piggyback on that question, are those the only people that we bring in for revenue programming? Those 8 students?
Not just the GATE students, but non-resident students across all the districts. So we have ILC, PLC, GEMS program, all of those special education programs are marketed to all of the communities around us. And if their special education staff feel like our program's the right fit for a student in their community and they can't offer that service, they contact us, they contract with us as if we were an outside provider.
But how many do we have?
How many programs or students?
How many students?
8 to 10 right now?
Yeah.
So it is that number? There's
Yeah,
eight, about 8 to 10? Because every year we talk about trying to impact that and bring a program in-house and have it pay for itself by having other people come in, and it doesn't seem like that changes too much.
Because everybody else is doing it.
Yeah.
What Diana said to us on Saturday. Right, Rich?
Right, I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, you want to keep your kids home, and so developing that program has two benefits. It keeps your out of costs, out of district placement costs down, and you get to keep your kids in house.
Oh, yeah.
But a lot of towns are following that same model.
Yeah, and I think I think for us, thinking that that could be a revenue source may not be as likely as maybe it was in the past.
I
Yeah,
think at its height, it probably had about 15 kids in it.
yeah.
6 or 7 years ago, so I think it was a fairly decent revenue stream.
Yeah.
As other towns picked up on that.
Our strategy to that is not so much to make it a revenue stream, but to ensure that we're not having students go out, which is typically much more expensive. So right now we have $2.8 million in students who are served outside of our district because we don't have a program for that particular
Right.
high-level disability. And so we'd see it more as a potential, from a budgetary perspective, as a savings, and it's a bonus to have a community around us also, use our facility, use our resource, and make it an offset more than anything else.
Right, so, great presentation, good overview stuff. Is there a way that people can get into the details of it a little bit more? Is there a more detailed report of, what the breakdown of some of these lines are?
This is pretty detailed. It's more detailed than it's been previously. I guess my statement would be, call us. If you have a specific question about a real fine-grained thing, give us a shout. There's something like, correct me if I'm off base, 14,000 lines of budget, and I don't know if that's beneficial to sort of give 14,000 lines of budget, because I want to make sure there's explanation and understanding for each.
But if somebody wanted detail on, say, the SPED or on the athletic budget or something, a document could be prepared to go out
Yes.
to these people.
Every year I get a call about the athletics budget. It's the most popular one in $42 million. It's
Right.
about $70,000. We have a fine-grained detail I'm happy to share.
Great. The last question that I have is, the budget balances, I think it'll go up a little bit more because we just did some forecasting, got a few expenses coming in less than we thought it was. But you have these beyond service requests that you want, that are needed, or, would help the school system, but how are you going to fund them? Because there's only one, we split the budget 2/3, 1/3. Any extra dollar that comes out of that is coming from the town, which doesn't have any extra resources either. So what is your solution for getting a couple of these 4 or 5 things that are needed without having, without taking it from the town side of the budget?
Yeah, it's not an easy solution. So 2 things. One, I don't want to sit here and pretend there's an easy solution. There's no magic wand for that. And just like the town does, the school district also has to prioritize its needs. I'm sure the town's list is, just as long, twice as long. So I recognize that. I also want to make sure that to provide the services we do in the school department, that we don't hinder the town. I don't want to take something from town just to have it be in the schools. That's not beneficial. We're part of the town. We're not any more important than any other department that you have here. That being said, we are looking to try to find ways to be more efficient and work around those edges, right? And keep chipping away at those priorities. So, for example, the athletic director, that's been on the list for years now, and we believe we can deliver on it this year. We think there's some work that needs to be done in financial forecasting to maybe ensure that's sustainable. And that list that you see there has some new ones this year, and it might take a few years for us to get the resource in line to be able to do that. But it's important to us that we're not reactionary, that we identify them early, and then we start working toward them. So I share that list as a way to say, these are things that we're looking for in the next few years, and things we're going to start working toward.
So there's maybe some of your expenses will come in less, but I've been doing this for a long time. It's pretty thin, right? There's not a lot. Your payroll is 85 plus, percent, steps go up, overtime, all that stuff gets it up to a number that doesn't leave a lot left over. Sped can impact it one way or the other. So it's really hard to get those extras into a school budget. So I don't know how, it'd be great to say, yeah, let's get those 4 things and get them right away, but realistically, it's not easy to come across that. So.
I couldn't agree with you more, and we recognize again that it's a work in progress, and that's okay. You should know that strategic plan that we've been thoughtful to develop guides that work. It also means sometimes when you prioritize something, it means you don't have something else. And you have to be honest with yourself about that, but you can't always have it all. But that you want to do what's right by your students and get the best that we can.
Sean? Ron, I just want to start by saying thank you very much. You're very enthusiastic. You came on board a year or 2 ago, and passionate. It's like your own money. It's like the students are your children. So thank you. Just one general question, and I could follow along with you. It had to do with the salaries, 85% of your budget. Do we lose many teachers to other towns? And do we steal teachers from other towns? How does that, it doesn't, that Rich is, career teacher and one, no, just kind of curious when you were talking about that. And
we comp our salaries annually to see where we stand in the region, and we have a very competitive salary rate, especially for teachers. We don't have a very high attrition number in terms of teachers leaving to go elsewhere. In my experience, it's the lowest attrition number I've ever. This institution has the lowest attrition number of any institution I've had the fortune to be a part of. There are certainly districts that attract people potentially more, but they are few and far between, and they're not very close to Scituate, frankly. We sometimes have people leave the district around us to come here. We want to be respectful of our colleagues in our region as well, and so we work closely with them to make sure there's a transition that is appropriate for the kids that person might be leaving another town to come help our kids.
I was just curious. Thank you.
It's a very good town. Very good. Kids are good.
Maura?
Thanks, John. Sort of build on what Tony was talking about, looking at your list of above service level needs or whatever. So the bottom 4 are top priorities, so they're reflected, right? The library, the adjustment counselors, the language base, the athletic director. What I would love to see or understand, so every year you come before us with this wish list, but I don't feel like I ever get to see what of your wish list was filled the year prior. So I'd love to understand, what you added last year from your wish list. That would be number 1 for me, just to kind of understand what happened after you left town meeting, right? What were you really able to do? And that's what I always struggle with when we go through this document, is I never really, like when we go through our budgets here, we get our budget, then we see our actions, so we can see sort of, where we added, where we subtracted. I don't get that with this, and it's okay, that's your format, but what would be helpful for me is just to understand, A, what have you been able to add? And then B, how are you going to prioritize this list of needs? Because we have up at the top that STEAM is one of your number 1 priorities, and we've got, a math teacher at the high school. We've got 4 math specialists that you aren't able to add this year. So how do you do that?
2 really good questions. The first one's actually quite easy. So after the April town meeting, whatever is approved, this document is updated and it's already on our website. And so everything we could add, or any change that was occurring, would be reflected in that document and is available for every public person in the world to go see. Transparency is really important to us. So last year you could take a look at it. Unfortunately, last year we walked into a deficit, so we added nothing. Our goal was to simply sustain the level of services that we had, and kudos to all 6 of our labor groups who helped work with us to do exactly that last year. The same will be done with this budget process as well. Certainly changes can be made between now and when we have the April meeting for the legislature for our town. Mm-hmm. Any changes that occur between now and then will be reflected and updated in this budget, and that gets posted to our website as well. So you can always track those things that were added and were not added. You'll notice that on Appendix B, that list doesn't have what I'm going to call a rubric score. We do a pretty comprehensive prioritization process with our district building leaders around what those priorities are. We score them using a pretty comprehensive analysis there. I purposefully keep that off there. That's a little bit of the behind-the-scenes work that we do to help come to a recommendation. But I can assure you that process is not haphazard and it's very thoughtful.
Thanks.
Anything else? Well, I'll say the thing that nobody wants to say and people don't want to hear. I kind of feel liberated to be able to say this now. The bottom line is $1.3 million fees that you have, that you actually, that the town assesses for usage and everything. I think it's a shame that the town at some point started to do that, because what we've done, and it's not you and the school committee, but what we've done is we've created a monster where these actually should have been paid as part of the school experience through the taxes. And now we've created a situation where this is a part of the school, it's a part of how we look at our school, and I'm like, my feeling is this should be funded through the taxes for our school education. That's the way it was. We've decided to get ingenious on how to be creative and trying to lessen property taxes so that people wouldn't have to pay it, and it's getting larger and larger every year. I look at these needs that you've listed for 1.2 million, of which we're looking to pay for 319 or something. So, you know, there's another $900,000 that frankly should be paid. And now you're trying to, you know, go around and try to figure out how you prioritize it. This is a part of the whole process of our town services. And I know we did the study about the new school. My feeling is that there needs to be an operational override for the school and the town, and I haven't even gotten to the whole point of our capital. You know, all of your budget is for services, for contractual services and professional services. There's really nothing in there for capital. And when we get to our own capital plan, there's really nothing in our budget that we're funding for capital improvements. And the town needs to focus in saying that, you know, it's gonna have to be it has to be a part of the budget process, in addition to what you presently have. It can't be, let's carve out and then create a capital. It's got to be, here's your services, both town and school. We need to have, as a part of the budget, capital to maintain going forward, because that's been the problem for the past probably 40 years, and it's going to continue to be that way. And building a new facility, whether it's a town facility or a school facility, you're going to get in the situation was how are you going to maintain it? Because you're literally all services, you know, your budget, just that pie chart right there demonstrates where do you find capital to pay for. And in fact, you're doing the 4% is what, materials and supplies. And yet PTOs are running stuff to try to have parents bring in supplies to augment or supplement. The town has to take a serious look and say, okay, we need to increase the budget for the town and school in order to adequately provide the services, not necessarily saying that the teachers are not teaching well, they're doing a superb job. Not saying that the town employees, the police or fire, DPW, or other people in the town are not doing their job. It's what they need to do it properly. And I think it's sad, but it needs to be said. And, you know, otherwise, people continue to complain and say, why am I paying for this fee? Why am I paying to get on the bus? You know, and why am I paying for the athletic fee, or why is the building falling apart? Why is the ceiling falling down? There's no money. And I think, you know, that's something that has to be a serious discussion about increasing both school and town so that you have enough to do the services you need that need to be done, not wants, that are necessary, as well as saying, how are we going to maintain our buildings in addition to, so it's a portion or a percentage of your budget that you cannot touch, that it's specifically identified for this. You can't rate it, even when they're bad times. This is what it's for. It's a part of everything. And it's the same thing on the downside. You know, I look at Jim and I'm like, he is literally trying to, as prior town council, or town administrator, try to carve out money from free cash every year to try to save, to be able to fund our capital plan. It can't be done. It's not sustainable. And I say that now because I think it was a great opportunity to raise it, because you need it. You need it to run your facilities. And so that's the thing I take out of this. I actually went through it saying it was well put together, well planned, and I just thought, we need more money. Need more money for the schools, and you're gonna need more money for the town side. So, there's my soapbox. Any other questions from the audience? Any questions, anybody? Yes?
Amber Bynum, Chris Road. John, I could not agree with you more.
All right, did you get that done on tape? I gotta get all this, there are very few times I get that in my career here that Ann agrees with me, so that one we need to replay, but...
And I have to tell you, it started with a $50 activity fee in 1993. And it has gone downhill with a thud. And it really is unfortunate. Public education should be public and should be borne by all of us. And I understand that people don't want to pay their taxes. I've educated my children. My parents educated me. And my children will educate their children, and so it goes. That's part of living in a community. We are a community. And it should be, you would probably get rid of most of your traffic problems if people didn't have to pay the bus. You know, that would be a really fine solution for the junior high. High school, not so much, because they don't want to travel on the Blues or Bruce. And that's a given. But still in all, it should be part of, as you have very aptly pointed out, the experience of going to school.
Yep.
And I thank you for that, John.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Ann. That's, any other questions? Anybody else? All right. Ron, Paul, thank you very much. We'll, we aren't voting on anything until, but the numbers, so I mean, we're not doing that until later, but thank you for the presentation.
Thank you,
Thank you. Great night.
Jack, can we take a 10-minute break? I'll tell you why. We've been doing this for 2 hours. We're supposed to have one at 8, but we'll make you next in line. How about that, okay?
Doing pretty well with the agenda.
We're going to take a break, except for Maura. Maura was late. We are back on, and we are on for a South Shore Vocational Technical High School, and it's 310, and which is here. So, good evening.
Good evening. Dr. Hickey, for those of you who do not know him, and I'm John Manning.
Thanks, Jack. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, my name's Tom Hickey. I've had the pleasure to present to you in the past. I've served at South Shore as superintendent for 8 years and started my career as a teacher at South Shore in 1994. So very proud of what we've been able to accomplish. I know it's been a long evening for you, so I'll try to target my comments, but by all means, if I gloss over something that's of critical importance to you, you will kindly interrupt me and I'll be happy to address what you need. The handouts that Jack provided at your spots can be broken down in a couple of ways. The spiral-bound book is what we would call our budget book. It will break down the lines of our budget and offer you a one-year comparison. I think to cut to the chase, the most important page in the budget would be the inside cover. So if I could just direct your attention to the inside cover where you see preliminary assessments FY20. And then I'll go through the other handouts in just a moment. So we're projecting, we're proposing an overall budget of 3.1%. So if you look at the top, the column that says FY 2020, that would translate into $13,816,873. I'm happy to say that in the aggregate, we're going to be asking our communities for a net reduction of assessments, which is nice. It doesn't matter, though, when it's one community you ultimately want to focus on. But essentially, we're projecting increased revenue to help offset the budget increase. So what you see in yellow, where it says district assessments in the middle of the page, it's showing you that with a projected increase in Chapter 78 of about $105,000, which is in the preceding line, with a projected increase in non-resident tuition, and with an estimate of 70% regional transportation, we should see revenue increase of about $507,000. The total budget increase is $414,934. Below, on the second half of the page, you'll see the breakdown by community, and that's where you can find Scituate. So Scituate's assessment increase as part of this proposed budget would be an increase of about 2.98%, or $22,969. We are serving 45 students. That number has held steady. It's been within a few, but the last couple of years, there have been 45 students. So that number, in part, as you know, is based on a number of factors, not the least of which is the local minimum contribution. When I look back and compared Situate's minimum local contribution from fiscal 19 to fiscal 20, I saw an increase of about $18,000. So if you were to ask, what would you attribute the increase to, that would be the biggest driver. Now, that's not the sole funding force behind this budget. The minimum local contribution in the aggregate is about 74%. The rest of the budget, as you know, includes transportation, debt service, capital, and any operating costs that are above the minimum. And that's something I can show you in the other handout, if I could direct your attention to that. So the other handouts under the paperclip include, the top one is a repeat of that cover page.
Can I ask one question before
Please.
you go on? You're taking money out of your stabilization fund?
Yes, so that, where it says stabilization fund transfer, $38,160, we set aside money when we anticipated that we were going to renew a bus lease. So we recently leased 12 propane buses. I'm happy to say that we're projecting our overall transportation costs to be slightly reduced. So as part of an offset to those, we had 7 leased buses, propane, and we owned 7 diesel buses. And so now we've unloaded our oldest 4 diesel buses, and now we have a fleet that's 12 active propane buses, and we have 3 diesel buses that are spares. But essentially, to your point, that is part of the offset for the cost of those buses. So that's helped to lower, that's why the bottom line budget is the lower 13,816.
Okay. Thanks.
Sure. So the first packet, which has a repeat cover page, which I'll skip over, I hope that you'll find that this level of detail will, at least as we continue to try to do, back up where we're getting the numbers. On page 2 of the document, this explains, this is essentially a numerical form, how our regional agreement operates. And you would have seen something similar last year and in the past. So we have some debt from a 2011 roof and window project. And that'll be rolling off in fiscal '22, probably December of 2021. In order to calculate each town's share of that, we looked at the 3 fiscal years prior to the debt authorization. So if you look later in this document, and you feel free to move ahead if you want, find the Scituate line and ask where those numbers are coming from, it's based on proportional enrollment. In this case, it's the average enrollment fixed for the life of the note for the 3 years preceding the authorization. That's why you will see references to 10-107, 10-108, and 10-109. So other than decreasing principal, which leads to decreasing interest, those numbers are essentially fixed for the 10-year note that we have. That's the debt portion of every community's assessment. And as you probably know, we bring you one number. So whatever assessment number we're bringing that goes in the warrant, that includes at any given time debt, capital, and operating expenses. It's not segregated. The middle of that same page, you'll see a few columns that are in a sandy-looking color. That's capital. So on any given year, when we build in a capital proposal into our overall budget, presenting it as one number, we look at the average of the average enrollment for each community of the 3 fiscal years preceding, but it's rolling. Every year, one year rolls on, another year rolls off. And then the last column that you see in white, which is dated 10-118, those enrollment numbers are what are used to calculate operating expenses and transportation expenses. So essentially, if you look at Scituate's numbers for debt, capital, and operating, those are expenses beyond the minimum local contribution. It's done in proportion. So that's kind of the back, that's the back end of how the numbers get calculated. On page 3, we simply took those raw numbers and converted them to percentages. So you could make the statement that, okay, they're looking for X dollars in capital, Scituate's share is going to be 7.14% of whatever the ask is for capital. You can see what Scituate's share of debt service was when we authorized and confirmed that debt, and the share of operating costs. Very, very stable over time, and those percentages should reflect that. Okay. Page 4 of this document offers you an unpacking of that assessment number. And so if we look down at Scituate's assessment, you will find all the elements that I had just mentioned. There's the minimum local contribution. That comes from the state. That's the minimum 642,060. The next column after that is when we take in non-resident tuition from students who are not in the district, it's a pass-through. We collect money. We're collecting money right now. We are projecting we're going to collect a sum of money, and we use it as an offset to assessments in fiscal '20. That's why that entire column is in the negative. Those numbers are determined by the proportion of student enrollment from the most recent October 1 report. So the towns with the larger number, you can assume, have larger proportional enrollments. The third column, which says above the minimum, those are operating costs that go beyond the minimum contribution as required by statute in the first column. That's also done in proportion. Situate's 45 students divided by the total number of students. What are our other operating costs that are not otherwise classified as capital or transportation? There's the transportation column that you see there. Again, proportional, most recent October 1 numbers. There are the debt service numbers, fixed 3 years preceding the debt authorization, and then there are the capital numbers.
Tom, could you explain non-resident tuition, but where all these towns listed are within the district, so...
Yes, so we are enrolling students from outside of the 8 communities.
Right.
And they are paying a tuition that is set by the state. We bill and collect that tuition, and then we use that revenue, the same revenue number which you would find on the first page. That's the revenue that we're using, the $1,096,531. That number, which is on the cover page of that document, that's the offset to lower the district town assessments.
All right, I see.
What is the tuition? I'm curious.
To the penny, can't be sure. I think it's 125% of the foundation enrollment. I'm going to place that around $17,000 per student.
Okay.
Yeah. The non-resident community is responsible for the transportation of the students. But yeah, so that number is set by the state. So we get that number. The school committee votes to approve it, that they acknowledge it, and then that's what we bill the communities for. So, and again, that's an offset to the total assessment. Next page, page 5, just takes all those columns out and boils it down to the one-year comparison. So there you'll see Situate's assessment, which is in at $792,870, an increase of $22,969 or 2.98%. The back page is taken largely from the DESE website, which just shows you the back, again, just the paper trail for the minimum local contributions, which I mentioned earlier. And then the final piece of paper, the final page of the handout, is just a one-year, current year breakdown of enrollment. So I would start with the numbers so you have a sense of this. Now, if there are, by all means, please jump in with questions, but I just want to speak briefly to what are we looking to spend it on? And that's what the other 2 documents under the paperclip that I gave you. It's nothing more than what, it's a slightly revised presentation from what I presented to our school committee back in December. A 1-page summary cheat sheet, and then a more complete PowerPoint. I'm very pleased with the direction of the school, our mission, obviously placing a heavy emphasis on having high-quality vocational technical programs. We couldn't get to where we are without some creative partnerships, and I would be remiss if I did not mention my own gratitude for the extended relationship that we have with Scituate. Not only have we found a great partnership with the solar array, but we are also partnering with regard to some additional transportation needs that we have. Having credentialed bus drivers is a very difficult position to fill. And we currently this year are contracted with Scituate. They do one of our bus runs. This is the second year that this has happened. It's a revenue stream for the town. It helps us meet our needs as our bus stops are very diverse over our 8 communities. So that has been mutually beneficial and very helpful. In general, with a zero-based budgeting approach, the way that I start my budget is every department head and cost center supervisor gets a Google Doc, a Google Sheet, which they fill from zero. every single cost center, every single vocational academic program, maintenance, transportation, business office, main office. And they populate these sheets down to the unit. So I can have a very boring but perhaps important conversation about 3-ring binders if I wanted to. Please don't ask me how many we're ordering, hopefully not as many. But that has actually been very helpful in the last 7 or 8 years, because those little adjustments, as opposed to taking last year's number and sprinkling a few % on it, cuts to the chase very quickly and has allowed me to be able to prioritize capital dollars as needed. In this particular year, with regard to capital, I'll speak to that because that's a bigger number. The increase in non-resident tuition, 1-year revenue, I heard similar themes in the previous presentation about capital and revenue. And I must say, I'm seeing it in a similar way. Seeing that we had you can't build an operating budget off of revenue that you cannot rely on. So one of the rationales that I had that I presented to Jack and the school committee was our capital requests fall into 3 categories. The biggest is we have one practice field that has been poorly drained for more years than I care to count. So the biggest ask of capital is about $430,000 to put in proper drainage, irrigation, and reseed our baseball field, which doubles as our lacrosse, soccer, and football practice fields. And that'll be great. It's been cited, not in a heavy-handed way, but it's been noted in NEASC reports, but we've deferred it. We've been prioritizing what's inside the building. But this is a year to tackle that. The other big capital ask, and if you flip through the PowerPoint as I'm talking, by all means, go right ahead. The other one that I mentioned on there's a capital slide in there, is continuing to put money in our stabilization account for building renovations. We had a master facilities audit done last year, and I spent considerable time at respective advisory, finance committee meetings raising awareness. The engineering firm concluded, as you probably know, we have a 130,000 square foot school, of which the majority of it is a 1962 building with a 1992 addition. By my count, they estimate about $11.7 million of maintenance costs. Yeah, you've heard it, right? You hear a lot of that. What I'm attempting to do is to roll the dice every year and wait for MSBA to say yes and keep our maintenance costs controllable in 1-year increments. So as of today, prior to this budget passing, we've got about $1.1 million in a stabilization account. And the way I've explained it to the school committee is the first priority was the real initial reason we wanted to establish it, and you folks were supportive of this, which is if MSBA does invite us in, not for a new school, but for a renovation, and we're seeking a renovation and a modest addition. I would have said this to you last year. I want to have the $500,000 necessary in that account, because if they say yes to us in January, and we've got 270 days to secure 8 towns, I cannot come back for a second bite at the apple and say, oh, by the way, never mind that budget I just presented to you last month, now I need you to carve up a $500,000. That is dead on arrival. So I feel confident that while it will be the 5th time that we will be seeking it, there are other districts that have certainly been in it longer. We've already filed and submitted the statement of interest on February 1st. But should we get accepted next December into January, I would be coming to our communities seeking simply a thumb up that we can move ahead, knowing that we've got the money set aside to take the next logical step. But the other money that we're trying to set aside, the way that I try to explain it is, the rest of the stabilization that I want to continue to grow is to be able to be in a position to address those other maintenance needs that might not be able to wait. So we're on a septic system. So the 1962 building has no sprinkle system in it. The 1992 roof, which I still call the new wing of the building, is approaching the end of its useful life, and on and on and on. We have a well-maintained building. We always have, and we will continue to do so. But I want you to understand the rationale behind why setting that money aside is helpful, because we very rarely want to go and look for a debt issue, because we need to have our towns on board. So for right now, there is no crisis, but I feel that every year we're able to position ourselves a little bit better. So the single biggest game changer for the budget is the increase in capital. Now, I'm happy with the fact that we've increased the capital, we've seen the increase in revenue, which means we've really kept our operating expenses as tight, as far as I'm concerned, as tight as possible. In terms of personnel, the build-ins to this budget include a part-time school resource officer, which is about $25,000. We will contract with the Hanover Police Department, and 2 advisor positions for an art and music club and a junior varsity golf coach. There are no other big drivers in the budget. So as I looked at these numbers and prepared the presentation for the school committee, the message was, capital's going to be a headliner for us, but if we plan well and we prioritize well, it shouldn't have to be a budget buster. The last thing I want is to come with assessments, because I only get to come to you with one number. And at the end of the day, if the number is driven by a huge spike in capital, I know what I will get in response is sympathy, but at the end of the day, that's a big number. So I want to level out any spikes that we have, and your continued support has allowed us to do that.
When do you think, do you have an SOI in already, you said?
Yes.
And so when do you think, what's your best guesstimate, the next budgetary cycle?
What MSBA, they've been very good to work with. They're very responsive. But at the end of the day, what they tell me is every year is different, and it truly depends on who applies. So if we happen to get a year where we are an older, well-maintained school in need of space, and the master facilities plan is on our website if you're interested ever in a deeper dive. If there are districts or schools that come in with more pressing safety needs, they will always go to the top of the list. There were 70 SOIs submitted by 56 districts, and 13 of them were invited in. So we didn't make the top 13.
Did they let you know where you were in the pecking order?
No. No, they make recommendations. There is no formula, there's no record that I could request to say that we were, 67th.
Yeah.
But the feedback I get is the information we're giving is detailed. They did do a site visit at the school a year ago in the summer of 2017, which is a good sign, because now it basically takes, are they writing a fairy tale or is it the real deal? They come and see it. We get a third-party master facilities plan to try to help validate what we're talking about. And so I think we're well-positioned in terms of laying the facts out. And in the meantime, we're going to continue to do the best job that we can, and we're not going to say the sky's falling or the ceiling is falling when it's not. Beyond that, I'd be happy to address any smaller issues that you see, but I think that's probably an adequate overview. And certainly the spiral-bound book might offer some questions as well.
Questions from the board?
I just have one.
Okay.
Can you explain, you say there's the minimum assessment for a town.
Yes.
Where does that number come from? Is it backed into, or is it?
That is the state, that is the number driven by the Chapter 70, by statute and by the formula. That's from the Department of
So
Education.
that's the 39-part formula that says.
Correct.
That we have to pay. So you get that amount, and then you just add your state funding, and that's how you get your budget total?
Yes, so we would start with our budget, we would back out any state aid or revenue. We would take the minimum contribution, and then however much the budget is beyond that, we would apportion it as per the regional agreement.
However much the budget is beyond that.
Right, so so in this 13.
Right, so it was 620, what was the minimum, 6?
Yeah, right. So if, on page 4 of the first handout, which breaks down everybody's assessment, right? If we looked at that first column that said FY20 minimum contribution, and you go to the very bottom, you'll see a number that says $5,799,992. Okay. So that number plus and I'm using the governor's budget when I say this, on the very first page where it says Chapter 70 state aid, $4,425,217. When you add those two numbers together, you will get the foundation budget. By statute, The Commonwealth and the 8 communities are expected to spend that amount of money on educating the kids at our school. That's the floor. You take on debt, you divvy it up differently, you take on capital, et cetera. So, and as you, I have no doubt well know, the increasing amount of conversation about how this formula is woefully out of date is why you see numbers in all school districts across the Commonwealth going beyond the minimum. We have been beyond the minimum since the start. I mean, for the last 25 years. But that's where that number essentially comes from.
So the minimum is just the starting number.
Yes.
And then
The
it'll-
reality is. Now, I will say that depending on the pacing of any Foundation Budget Review Commission changes, whether it's the governor's budget that wants to phase it in over 7 years, or there's other legislation that's going to be proposed that's puts an accelerant to that, to add more money for special education and English language learners, that's where we're going to see in the news, and we're going to all want to talk to our legislators about the pacing of putting more money. Because if there is more money, if the foundation budget grows and the state determines the community's ability to pay, by statute, Chapter 70 has to fill in the gap. So the 39-part formula that figures out a community's ability to pay, it is what it is. But if the foundation budget is calling for us to spend more than the peanut butter and jelly diet for public education, it means that Chapter 70 should grow. I was pleasantly surprised. I was at Whitman Finance Committee meeting the night before the governor's number came out, and I said to them, I am assuming level-funded Chapter 70. The next day, the governor's budget comes out. It's a modest risk, but we're going to take it. And that proposed number was an increase of $105,000. So we adjusted the numbers, and that was one of the driving factors as to why the aggregate assessment to the towns was down. If there's more funding from the state, it should translate. I would say the same thing to you about regional transportation. That's not something that a non-regional town would pay too much attention to, but as you can imagine, one of the incentives to regionalizing is that we can't charge for bus fees because we get direct state aid. But that's a political football every year as to how much money the state will reimburse. That has been as low as in the mid-50s, and it's never crested above 80% in recent memory. But when you increase regional transportation reimbursement, it decreases that column called transportation to the towns. So, remains to be seen.
One last comment, I think your school's great. I think it has a great niche in our community, and it gives an opportunity to a lot of kids to succeed. So I think it's very valuable, so.
Scituate has been in it from the beginning, and we appreciate the support.
Yeah, it's extremely valuable. I'm curious, why, so if you use the governor's budget number, which we all know needs to go through the legislature, right?
Yes.
And that comes down.
It's on us.
Well, that was going to be my question,
Yeah.
that you don't necessarily put that back out into the assessment to the communities?
I get one shot.
Okay.
And I'm going to, it's a calculated risk. What I would prefer not to do, if I become super conservative on regional transportation and Chapter 70, then it means that larger assessments on nights like this to our 8 communities. So I don't think it's reckless. I don't think it's reckless to use the governor's number, but to directly answer your question, should regional transportation or Chapter 70 aid come in lower than we're projecting, we would have to make those adjustments within the operating budget year of fiscal '20. We have not had to deal with that, thankfully. And my initial outreach, talking to legislators and others, that, just to get their feedback, suggests cautious optimism that the number that's being put out by the governor wouldn't be lower. The debate is going to be where the extra money goes. Everyone wants to put more money into it, but the conversation is to where. Where in that formula that we can all go on the DESE website and see, where are you going to add, are they going to add in more money for special education? Are they going to change the assumed number? What about English language learners? What about low income? Those are the areas that the Foundation Budget Commission came out with as priority areas for funding. Health insurance. Where is it ultimately going to land? If you look at the governor's budget and you download it and you flip in maybe halfway through the 29 pages, you will find his proposed changes to the dollar for each of the categories. So it might cure insomnia, but it is an interesting way to compare to what's currently out there, so that you could actually see, okay, where is he prioritizing where to put those dollars? So just increasing Chapter 70 does not guarantee that a community like Scituate or a school like ours would be a direct beneficiary. It really depends on where it's targeted. That remains to be seen through the spring.
And I just have one more question for Nancy. What did we budget for them?
We adjusted it in our financial forecast meeting. Right now, we're $344 under the current assessment.
$344.
Hold on a minute. Okay.
Yeah.
Talk to Cheryl.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. I think I'm proud to support the Votech School. It's such, I wish we had more of them. Yeah.
We need a slightly bigger one, but
Yeah,
we'll get there.
Yeah.
And it is well-maintained for the age of the school.
Yeah.
I mean, I recommend that you go by and see how well-maintained it is.
Almost hurting you now? That
Pardon?
it's so well-maintained? Almost hurting you now?
Yeah.
We have.
Coming back to
We have made that comment, but we, you know,
Yeah, no,
we
you have to.
simply can't,
Right.
there's no alternative. So we'll wait our turn, we'll make our case.
Right, right. And I've read you've submitted an SOI more than once. It's been a past few years.
This is the fifth SOI we've submitted.
okay.
So every year, everything's a year older.
Yeah, right, right.
And we are seeing some stains on the ceiling in the 92 wing, but I've been there when there were buckets in the hallways before we replaced the roof over the 1962 building, so we've not been in that position for a long time.
I thought we did the roof not long ago. On the old...
2011.
All right, okay.
Yeah, I know.
I was going to say, I remember doing it.
Yeah.
I didn't realize it that far. Yeah, the roof.
Yeah, where does the time go? But
Yeah,
there.
right. Okay. No,
I just have one question about when you're projecting enrollment. So I'm looking at, you've got 21 seniors from Scituate, and then the numbers drop pretty dramatically. How do you gauge what your enrollment's going to look like?
This is a good time of year to ask that question, and I'm going to know more on Friday. So we wait for our biggest recruiting group, of course, is a rising ninth grade group, current eighth graders. And so we wait for our communities to have maybe it's their second quarter report card or it's a progress report right around this time. So we accept applications throughout the course of the school year. So I will have our admissions committee telling me we'll do first rounds of admissions at the end of this week, and we'll continue to do rounds of admissions through the spring. What I have to say, and I appreciate you asking this question, and this deserves to be said, that the cooperation from your public school district is one of the most appreciated that I've seen in my years. What I mean by that is, the staff at Gates, the guidance staff, the administrators, are very welcoming to our recruiting guidance counselor. She is allowed to talk to all eighth graders in the community, not for hours and days, but at the very least, the philosophy that we're not going to self-select the kids that we think should have an interest in that school on 123, but we're going to let her talk to everybody. I don't get that in every community that I have. And I firmly believe that giving kids access and families access to information, wherever they end up going, is a good indicator of how a community really supports technical education. And we have always been able to count Scituate as a partner in that. And that helps as we get to know children from Scituate. We want them to be known as soon as they're entering, as they're entering the door, having a cooperative relationship with the sending school, because we need recommendations, because we need transcripts, we need a lot of documentation. And you folks have been great. Your school district has been great with that. So I thank you for that. It would make our job a lot more difficult to get information out to the community if the K-12 district said, sorry, we see you as a competitor. Despite me having to remind people from time to time that this school was organized and founded by taxpayers at town meetings 50-something years ago. We are a public school, and communities in this day and age, with decreasing enrollments and areas where it might feel like who's going to keep the kids, never have to worry about that here. So I thank you. Ron is great, Paul is great, and it's been great to work with them. And I get to go before them on Thursday night at advisory, so that's a good thing, too.
Any other questions? No. Well, thank you.
Thank you,
Sorry
Mr.
for the
Chairman.
wait, but we appreciate it.
Not at all, not at all.
It's not easy, and Jack, if you would be so kind to say hello to Sheila from the board. We miss her, and hope she's doing well, and hopefully,
She's still watching?
hopefully you're not driving her
watching,
crazy.
isn't she?
How about that, okay?
I'll leave that up to the family to decide.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
All right, now we're on to the 825 FY20 budget review. Community Planning and Development.
I have 4 pages of notes.
Brad, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. Hang on, let's get up. It's actually, going to start with, I guess, is it 171 Conservation Coastal Resources? Is that right?
That's what I see.
So, how about giving us like 2 highlights of what you're looking at, what you've done, what you're proposing for this year, and then we'll get to the numbers. How about that?
Great. If I could just take 2 seconds of your time and just kind of give the 30,000-foot level. I know folks within the departments are going to talk about their accomplishments and what they look forward to in the coming year, but just wanted to say, again, from the planning and development umbrella perspective, for FY20, we continue to look forward to working with various departments, boards and committees, town administrator on some of the higher level or big picture items, enhancing coordination, collaboration, working on some of our townwide municipal infrastructure issues. Just at the department level, we're going to be attempting, or at least looking into, an online permitting system. We already have it in place. It's the View Permit software, but we're looking to see how that might play out, rolling that out for both planning and conservation. Again, kind of in the exploration phase, but we'll be looking into that. Also, waiting till after town meeting, but we'll be rolling out the public process to update the town's townwide master plan. So excited about that. Be working with Kyle, DPW, and Coastal Advisory Commission on follow-up recommendations that came out of the coastal assessment, which there was a public meeting last week at the library. So Kyle can get more detail on that. Continue working with EDC and the planning board on initiatives in both Greenbush and North Scituate. And many other things, but that's all I highlighted on my sheet that I can see. So anyways, without further ado.
Good. No, I'm fine. I'm fine right now. That's good. Oh, good. Then let's just turn to conservation. How about that?
Okay, good evening, everybody. How you doing tonight? So, do you have my write-up? I mean, I can go through it.
Just highlight what you have,
As you want.
Well, it's just a few items that you think were important that you've accomplished and things you're looking to do. It's primarily not so much for our benefit, but for people, Amy, who are watching. So
Sure.
instead of hearing the numbers, then they're going to glaze over and
Yeah,
just
well, I
give
mean,
you
I can go
an
into
opportunity.
depth about what conservation is all about and what we
Well,
do
that would
in
keep
our
us here
office.
probably to about midnight, but we don't want to necessarily go into great detail. Just, like what you think are the highlights that you've seen in the past year, and then things that
Okay,
you think
sure.
are
So-
important.
We, in my office, we permitted over 300 different projects in the past year. As you know, we had a lot of effects from Winter Storm Riley and the nor'easters, so we had a lot of permitting outfall from that. Also, larger projects such as Toll Brothers and subdivisions, DPW projects like the culvert replacements on Bailey's, Gilson Causeway, water transmission line, water reservoir project. These are ones that we've permitted through notices of intent. The North Hummerock roadway and berm project, North-South River dredge project, dog park project, multiple additions and decks and other types of residential projects. We also accomplished a very important permitting of open space parcels with parking lots at Bates Lane, Crosby, and Higgins McAllister. We have been working trying to crack down on some of the people that are doing not the right thing with enforcement actions and penalties. We actually successfully just assessed a homeowner $2,100 penalty just recently for tearing down their house without a permit. So that was pretty significant. For Conservation Commission is taking our permitting serious, which they should. And so that's unpermitted projects or people that violate existing permit provisions may get penalized. Then we can go into construction oversight and so on, but yeah, so it's a pretty exciting office to work in, because you can see we're pretty busy.
Yep, good.
It's a two-person office. I have myself and my senior clerk, Jennifer Smith, who is new starting July. Carol Loeb retired after almost 23 years, I think, with the town, so that was in Conservation Department. So that was a pretty big loss to the office, but things are going well.
Good.
Patrick Gallivan also had been working part-time, but his funding ran out, so his service to the town has ended at this point as well.
All right, well, good.
So we're looking for level funding and no increases other than what the contractual obligation is.
So, FY19 was for $215,246. FY18 was actually more, it was $237,656. Your request was for $221,984. Town administrators recommended $216,000, just a difference of about $5,000 is what the difference between your request and what Jim and Nancy's. $4,500. All right. Questions from the board?
No.
Go ahead. No, feel free.
In your documentation, I think it really would be good to highlight that your second goal, which I don't know if you have it in front of you, is to assure alterations of Scituate resource areas are minimized. That's obviously, keen importance to a lot of people as we use up all of our developable space. So just wanted to highlight that that was on your goals and objectives for the coming year.
Thanks, Karen. Yeah.
Any other questions from the board?
No, I just want to say thank you. One number jumps out. People often, I think, comment that there's a challenge with enforcement, due to staff resources and things like that. But you had 450 site visits that you went on, and your whole office and the conservation went out on. So that's a lot. That's a lot of work. So thank you. I know it's not an easy task, and especially.
So many people are nice out there, though. I have to say that I really love Scituate and the people that live here.
Good.
And the beautiful coastline and everything, you know what I mean? But not everybody's nice, but most people.
The ones who aren't nice know they've probably done something wrong, so we'll have ample money to enforce.
The feedback I'm getting is you're a good person to deal with. Very, very nice as well. Thank you.
Oh, that's great.
Anybody else? No. Nobody has any questions for Kyle? This is her first budget review, and nobody wants to ask anything?
I thought Kyle was going to speak, so I apologize.
I think he's looking to duck out right now on this.
I'll speak. Thank you for having us. I've been here officially like 4 months now. So 2/3 of the annual report was before my time, but we had several home elevation grants that we completed. I submitted 2 a couple weeks ago. So that was my first go-around with that process, learned a lot. So hopefully in the upcoming year, I'll be able to help more people through that process where necessary. I recently got trained in the community rating system.
I was just going to say that.
The annual recertification's in May. So I'm kind of wrapping my mind around just preparing for that.
Have you brought together your team? I know in the past it's taken quite a bit of assistance from residents as well. Yeah.
So
there was a CRS working group, I believe, right?
So they're on the annual. It appears that it's something that an individual can do with like the help of town staff. But every 5 years there's a complete recertification that's like extremely comprehensive and thorough. So we'll be looking to reactivate the a subcommittee through the Coastal Advisory Commission, like probably right after I complete the annual recertification.
Okay, so that's like next cycle.
Yeah, so
Got
the
it.
next cycle will be 2020. Hopefully everything goes well in May of this year. And then we'll reactivate the committee in probably June.
Good.
Just to give us enough time. What else is going on? There was just a coastal community assessment. So residents, businesses, civic organizations, representative from all those, as well as town staff, town leadership were interviewed by the Consensus Building Institute this past year prior to me. And those interviews were compiled into a document called the Coastal Assessment, which was presented at the library to the public. I think it was presented before you guys a couple weeks ago. Last week, actually, at the library, we had 45 different individuals attend, mixed group, and it wasn't actually just the usual faces. Not that I necessarily know the usual faces, but I've met some of them. And it was good feedback. You know, residents are looking to work more with the town. So one thing we're going to do is there was an email. Basically, everyone signed up who signed in, and I asked them kind of if they would be open to joining like an email network. So now that we have those interested people, any other like coastal initiatives moving forward, I'll just shoot them an email and ask them if they want to show up and be involved and just kind of keep that energy, because they're good people. It was good feedback. There's a lot of other moving parts. I'm lucky that Brad comes from the coastal, CZM background, so he's introduced me to all his networks at the state level, and those relationships have helped us position ourselves really strongly for grants, and we've already received a few. I'm sure you've heard about them for the most part, I think. But
if not, we're going to.
Yeah. So I've been, the first 4 months have just been really trying to spend a lot of time getting to know the coast, and
good.
Today was a nice day for it.
You've been lucky you haven't had a storm yet.
Yeah.
It's getting spoiled.
All right, any other questions? None? Thank you very much, all right? All right, so we'll move on to the next one, which happens to be planning, 175. Karen, how are you?
All right, how are you?
I wish I were out of here sooner, but it's, 9:10? So in any event, thank you for waiting for us here. So can you give us, again, just kind of like a few things that you've gone through this year and a few things that you'd like to see done, and then we'll get to the numbers. How about that?
Well, we've permitted a lot of projects this year, two big ones in particular, Toll Brothers and Curtis Estates.
How many are in Curtis Estate anyways? How many?
16 lots.
16 lots.
16 lots.
Yep.
Plus, we do other site plan administrative reviews. We do accessory dwelling permits, residential cluster, mixed-use special permits, Form As, subdivision control law. So we've worked on that. We're working on, plus we issue stormwater permits, and we are working on, we've had several meetings with the stormwater working group, and we're working to revise the regulations. We had to put that a little bit on the back burner till March because we're working on zoning as well. We have a couple zoning articles proposed for town meeting.
The stormwater, those are our regulations that we're reworking, right?
Those are our regulations. We redid the bylaw a couple of years ago, and now we're working on the regulations. And part of our stormwater working group is engineers and people who have vested interest in filing stormwater permits.
Gotcha.
So we hope to have the regulations, public hearing in March or April, and get it refined.
Good.
So, like Brad said, we're going to be working on the master plan. Internal to Town Hall, we've restarted the development review team meetings where we have all the department heads come together and try to figure out where we are on a bunch of different projects.
Good. That's really good.
So that's been good, and we will keep permitting projects. This year looks to be another very busy year with the Drew project came in, and it's scheduled to have its first public hearing on February 14th.
Oh, okay. That's good to know.
The master plan, maybe it's more towards back. Is it anticipated to be a year? Is that what you're anticipating for start to completion to bring it to town meeting in 2020? Or is it something that it might take 2 years?
I think it could, I mean, I guess, in time sense, budgeted 12 to 18 months.
Okay.
Again, we don't want to rush it, and right now, kind of with the lead up to town meeting, I didn't want to start it. So I wanted to wait till we got through town meeting and then start the public process. I mean, we're under contract with these folks. There's not a necessarily end date, it's just a kind of a do not exceed budget cap. But again, I think we're in the process now, just establishing the master plan advisory committee, figuring out the town hall working group, and then just kind of in waiting mode to make sure that we, again, are not competing with a lot of other, good initiatives, but I think we don't want to get lost in the kind of noise. So, yep.
All right, well, let's look at the numbers then. How about that? It looks like you're not far off from what the town administrators recommended. You're requesting $251,759. Town administrators recommended $247,259. So that's just a variance of about $4,000, a little more than four. Your budget last year was $233,000, so it certainly has gone up. The actual in FY18 is 104.
Grass fault. Grass
Figures.
position used to be in inspections.
Gotcha. We moved it over.
Over, and there was also a vacancy that year.
Just a 100% increase, that's all.
But it's an important increase that we
The position.
we greatly value,
The
so.
position's a very important position. Questions from the board?
No, I just want to say thank you. I think a number of grants that you've brought in, your department, and I think, I added up to about 2.7 million. Obviously, the one nice big one from Mass Works was great, but I just want to thank you, because I know that's not easy to fit that in between all the other permitting and meetings and things that you have, and just want to say thank you for doing that. It makes a big difference to
What
get
do you
some
wanna say?
assistance. Can I say thank you?
Can you say thank you?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I didn't hear that. You want to say that again? Sorry. It's 9:15. I'm getting punchy here. Karen, thank you very much. We're going to move on to the economic development, but unfortunately, I don't have the budget on economic development.
Probably
Is that-
stuck in.
Oh, here it is. No, it is here. Sorry. It's 192?
Oh, right.
Oh, it was 182.
Thanks, Karen.
All right.
Good enough, thanks.
You have it? So, economic development, department request was 49,000. Jim, you recommended 46,000. Last year, they had 49. The only difference is you're reducing it by $3,000.
Simple math, the EDC gets 20% of the meals tax, and changes close to meals tax. We're projecting it coming down.
Yeah.
Okay.
I did meet with them, they asked if they could get $5,000 back, and get some final, numbers. We can look at it, but it's really just a straight math equation for the EDC project.
And in terms of accomplishments, they provided support, with their funding, which is largely for technical services. They provided support on a lot of these grant applications that we've gone after. They continue to fund support for the Greenbush and North Scituate efforts, and they will be involved in the Scituate Harbor Resiliency Project as well. So a lot of great stuff going on, and whatever level they're funded at, it's all additive to, what we're able to do. So it's good stuff.
Questions, anybody?
Just one quick one, Nancy, what is the, that doesn't go to free cash, right? Is there a balance in an account?
They have their own stabilization fund, which does have a balance. We're not putting anything additional into it. It's just over, I think, $33,000 right now.
33,000?
Any other questions?
Nope.
All right, we'll move on to the ZBA. How about that? Bob, how are you? Zoning Enforcement
well,
Officer,
thank you.
Bob Vogel.
You-
Good, good. Similarly, anything the past year that you, Bob, want to share with the public, and anything that you foresee the next year, aside from all the decisions and that you have to make for zoning issues with people and then the board?
Well, certainly the ZBA's been busy. There's a general workload coming through for individual situations that occur all the time. This year, however, we've had some large projects to deal with. One, Herringbrook Meadow, took up a tremendous amount of time. It's now pretty well on its way. I believe the hang-up, if you will, right now is just with the state DEP on the wastewater treatment situation, but that's likely to be resolved. And so that was really, I think, very well done by the board. Heard at numerous public hearings, a lot of back and forth with our engineering consultants to get the proper look at the stormwater situation and all of that. So as you all know, that project has been, in one guise or another, around for about 12 years. And we appear now to have come to the final part, and I believe the construction should start within the next 6 months. So that's, that's a conclusion of that particular situation. Stockbridge Landing similarly has been around for a long time, and the board recently heard the last, what we feel is change in that sort of pro forma, where that development will now be all duplexes, which is an improvement, we feel, over the multiple townhome blocks that were proposed, much larger buildings previously. So that's in its final review, and I expect, again, that will be going forward in fiscal year 2020.
Bob, about how many units in that, do you know offhand?
68.
68, okay.
Is that right?
Yes.
I think 68.
That's
Yep.
down from
Starting
76.
Okay. Thank you.
We're looking at the fairly early stages of a development by the Drew Company on the Greenbush parking lot. And that's going to be substantial when it does come along. And then, as Aaron mentioned, there's Curtis Estates off of Van Vinyl Road. So those are the, and Lawson Green as well, which is the friendly 40B that the town is doing with the Housing Authority. So all of that we have dealt with, we are dealing with, we are planning to be dealing with as fiscal year 2020 goes forward. So I think that's basically it for the zoning board. We do have a new zoning board secretary, Susan Tice, who's working out extremely well and helping as well in our office. She's part-time for the ZBA and part-time for the building department, inspections department.
Good. Did you lose somebody? Or-
We actually moved Ann Kelly into Maureen's position.
Okay.
Maureen Galvin's position. Maureen has moved on to be the chief clerk, I guess you would say, at the fire department.
Okay.
Oh, that's
So everybody seems to be happy with the new arrangement. I still see Maureen
Change is good.
quite often, and everybody's kind of moved up one step.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, your numbers are pretty much level funded. $226,264. That was requested, that was recommended. It is an increase of about $4,000.
Some of that's for office supplies, some is simply the increase, normal increase in pay that comes year to year. All of the line items in the zoning budget were approved by the town administrator, and the requested amounts were approved by the town administrator. So we don't have, we have no delta in that request and approval line.
Good. I'm just curious, do you get like periodicals, or Brad, do you get it, whether it's Lawyers Weekly or the Land Use and Planning by Bobrowski or anything like that, so the members both of the planning as well as the zoning board have it accessible so they can use it?
We do update the Bobrowski
Okay, good.
shelf in our cabinet.
How often is that reissued?
I believe it's every 2 years. I don't believe it's yearly.
A few years ago, I recommended, and they did it, that each board member have, it's a town copy, but they'd have one to be able to use. Do they have that?
I believe that's the case.
Okay.
Yes.
I only say that not just for the zoning board, but the planning board, because it's the treatise that really explains subdivision as well as the, nonconformities and variances, so that the board members should review it to know how to, if they haven't had experience with it, that's all. But
Yeah,
good, I just want to make
absolutely.
sure it's in there, because that's helpful.
Zoning's a huge field, as you well know, and it's somewhat of a moving target as well, as
Yep.
case law comes into
Changes.
existence that didn't exist before, or changes previous decisions.
Questions from the board?
No.
Sean? Do you want to thank him?
No, because he has another budget to go through.
All right, so let's move on then to the inspections. 241.
Okay, inspections, accomplishments over the past year. It's always interesting trying to correlate the past calendar year with the past fiscal year and this, that, and the other thing. Looking at an overview of the activities in the department for fiscal year 19 year-to-date is kind of interesting. We issued a total of 1,639 permits with a total permit fee value of $340,009.
Wow.
If you multiply that out and project it to an entire fiscal year, the total is around $583,000, which is a 12.5% increase over the previous fiscal year, 2018. So we've got that increase just as a general, this is business within the town of Scituate situation. This doesn't factor in very much, at least, Toll Brothers, which has started to roll. We've issued the first 4 building permits for Toll Brothers only about 2 weeks ago. So depending on their build-out, that could be a very large increase in our activity, both in inspection requirements, in processing permit paperwork, and in permit fees, obviously. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. And that doesn't include, for instance, Herringbrook Meadow. It doesn't include Stockbridge Landing, so those will come along as well. So we're almost looking at a different landscape than we've seen over the last several years.
Right.
Where a year-to-year incremental increase is expected, but this is a different ballgame, literally. So we don't know how different yet, but we're going to have to be prepared to react to it in one way or another. But it should all be good. I mean, whatever happens at the end of the day, the income generated by the department should rise to more than cover what we need to do to do our jobs. So.
One thing I had mentioned to Assessor, what's his name? Joe. When he was here was, and this is not for the new construction, but for the additions to, given potentially the schedule this year for the work through your office, it may not be feasible, but being able to provide the final occupancy permit, an opportunity for the assessor to go through to assess what was done based upon their initial application saying, I'm putting on the bathroom for X, and then the assessor goes through and ensures that, yeah, it may have been 30, but it may not have been a $100,000 improvement, because then it should be assessed at that going forward. So as opposed to, I think he was saying, it could take him a year or two before he actually has a chance. But coordinating that would be a great opportunity simultaneously, so that when you go or somebody goes to inspect the final inspection, he goes to be able to ensure that we assess it properly. But
Sure.
Just a thought.
Well, yeah, there's another step beyond the final inspection. There's an occupancy permit that's
Oh, see.
issued, and that's, that again is an occasion
To view it.
to make that assessment.
Your numbers are not too different. There's a difference here, but you requested $293,665. The recommendation was for $276,935. So there is a difference there of around $18,000, is that?
Right, the explanation for that is, again, trying to anticipate the increased activity, the increased number of inspections that are going to be required, and the compensation for our outside inspectors is by per inspection.
Okay.
So we pay them for every inspection they do. I'm not sure this even fully anticipates what we are going to be faced with, but I've talked with Jim about this and Brad, and I think the consensus is we're going to see what happens and then try and
Adjust
sort
it.
of back into
Makes
it
sense.
as we go and as we need to.
That makes sense.
There's two parts. One is the workload, which we'll wait and see what's coming in, and then we always have a fall town meeting. If the workload is coming in, we can make an adjustment to the budget. Second is what we pay the inspectors, wiring, gas, plumbing. That's a little bit bigger analysis that has to be done to ensure that if we raise their compensation, that the fees we bring are going to cover what they're going to get paid. So we're looking at that right now. Again, that's an adjustment we can make when we get that analysis done.
Yep.
Questions from the board?
Nope.
Bob?
Busy year.
I was going to say
Thank you very
Bob.
much.
Thank you, Bob.
There you go.
Thank you all.
Thanks for staying so late.
Not a problem.
Now we get Nancy, 135.
Okay, thank you all.
Thank you, Brad.
Finance Director, here we go, 135.
Sure your numbers are right, Nancy?
Remains to be seen.
132?
135. 132 is a reserve fund. I know that was just a quick quiz for me. I appreciate that.
Here it is, sorry. All right.
So I'll be brief because I know you still have a lot on your agenda. As you have heard from the other finance departments, Munis has been our main focus for the most part. We've gone live with payroll January 1st. We went live with utilities July 1st. Boat and motor vehicle went live in January, and we're working on the real estate personal property conversion right now. So that will be the last major conversion. We still have the smaller ancillary conversions to go through as well. You should have all received a copy of the town's capper for fiscal 18. That's in your box. It's also up on the website. As Pam did talk to you, we did debt issuance, actually. It was issuances because we did a bond and a ban. And it's been relatively busy, as it always is around this time of year. For the fiscal 19 goals, so far, our open checkbook, we've just put on hold until we finish all of our conversions. It's a major focus for Jim, so we will make it happen. I think it's back on my fiscal 20 goals. And the PAFRA, the Popular Annual Financial Report, I'm working on that now. It goes home with me every night in the folder, and it comes back every morning, not too much more done, and it goes home every night. So we'll just keep doing that until we finish it, and then I'll bring it back before the board. Number-wise, you'll see that there seems to be a dramatic increase in salary. Part of that is because at the end of the year last year, just over $22,000 was transferred out of the budget in year-end transfers to cover shortfalls in other budgets because I had a vacancy of the HR director. So that was not as large of an increase as it was. So if you take the fiscal 19 budget and add $22,000 to it, it was $322. We went to $332 for fiscal 20's request, and that is going to be the cost of living increases, and I also have 3 out of the 4 people in my office qualify for step raises as well. They're not at max step yet. The other major increase you will see is technical services. The board voted to award a new contract to our independent auditor, Powers & Sullivan. So this will be the first year of that larger contract, which will be $51,000. And then the other $11,000 is for our biennial OPEB evaluation, which is going to be due in fiscal 20. Yeah, it's never good news, but we do have to have it done every 2 years. So those are the two main drivers. There were no other increases in the other lines.
Questions from the board?
No, I'll ask her later.
The department request was for $398,645, and town administrator agreed with you. So it's good to know that the finance director and the town administrator are on the same page, same number.
that could be
I like that.
It can be really long budget cycles if we don't get on the same side. Thank you.
Thank you, we appreciate it. That completes our review of the budget. All right, so if we can now get to the 9 o'clock discussion vote on the amendment to architect contract for Council on Aging project.
I apologize, I thought I had put backup information on that in the packet, I don't see it.
It was in there.
There's a document of the original.
Yeah, just the original. I don't think there's any change.
I think it's just the AIA contract, I thought.
Board had asked for some additional information, which I probably didn't send.
You gave us that one before that did the ratios.
Yeah, I think there's something else too, though, but.
Are we
Do you
going to
wanna go
even
over it, or do you
discuss
wanna-
this, given the liquidity of the senior center project?
I mean, we can put it off to the next meeting, actually have a meeting this week on some of that
Okay.
stuff, so we can put it off to the next meeting.
In that case, we'll bump that, Lorraine, to the next meeting,
Look, we're catching up.
which brings us to new business. So let's get to new business. Did you want to ask any questions on that?
I just was, wanted to just be here for the discussion. I just was wondering what the modifications were to that.
Most of it was based upon the additional design work in the gymnasium.
Is it, excuse me?
In the gym, the additional design work that was done in the gym.
But I guess what I wanted to ask was, is the rec department going to be still there, or are they going someplace else?
Still be there.
They're still there.
They still will be there?
Yep.
Okay, and as part of that 4.2 million is going to be with them too? in
Yep.
that?
You have to move them in there. Yep.
Sorry, I had to wait.
That stinks.
Question.
Now I
Poor
feel
thing.
bad.
Feel badly.
All right, moving on to background information, copies, let's see. We are looking for renewal of the drain layers license for Laminar Construction Corp., Jones Contracting, Inc., and Stephen Spath, Site Pro Contracting, Inc.
Andrew Spath.
Andrew.
Huh?
Andrew Spath.
Did I say Spath? What did I say?
Steven.
Spath or
Did I?
something, don't know.
I don't know what I said.
Move to approve renew of a drain layers license for the following businesses: Laminar Construction Corp., Jones Contracting, Inc., Andrew Spath, also known as Site Pro Contracting, Inc.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Harris, seconded by Ms. Curran.
Is Megan which contract?
All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 See him.
No, he's not here. Yeah.
All right, let's just.
All right.
Sorry, second by Ms. Curran.
Yes, yes.
It's not in the additional paperwork you gave us, is it?
Fine, no problem.
All right. All right, let's move on to the next, which happens to be a discussion vote of a sewer betterment deferral. Let me get down to it.
Yeah. May I know what page that?
Same property, this comes through our office
Annually?
annually.
Has to be done annually.
She's done it for the past 5 years.
Yeah, no, there's somebody who qualifies for, based on their, what they get to live off of, and they're looking for a deferral on their payment on the sewer betterment. Town will get its payment for betterment as well as the interest accrued during the time period, so they're not losing any money, but this allows this person not to pay it, and because they have little means. So,
Motion?
Yep.
Move to grant a sewer betterment deferral for the current year. Taxes for parcel ID 14-1-49-0.
Motion by Mr. Harris, seconded by Ms. Canfield. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 And now we move on to other reports, or other business liaison reports. Who wants to start?
I can start. We, last week, Monday night, we had a rec meeting, discussed the field design, and the meeting that we had on Thursday. Thursday night, there was Tuesday night, a CPC meeting, where basically discussed the same thing, the rec design and the funding mechanism. Thursday, we had a financial forecasting meeting, where we went over new assumptions that were given to us from the MMA conference, and a few other expenses came in. The budget ended up going up 130 some, It went up a little bit, and the split went between the town and the school. And we discussed other possible, actually, Ron brought up some of the things he brought today about how to fund that stuff. And then Thursday night, we had our meeting for the capital projects that we were discussing, so. That was my week.
You're busy.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Anybody else?
I don't have any updates, no.
Just a quick, that capital planning has been doing the same thing we've been doing on the capital side, and that tomorrow night they're meeting at the Public Safety Complex, I believe, at 7 o'clock to discuss the water department capital budget. And I know that's of interest to people. And the Water Resources Committee is close to presenting offset recommendations to us soon. And they're also preparing, is that right? The policy? Yeah. You made that look. And they're preparing frequently asked questions that they hope to roll out for people about water issues.
Oh, that's good.
I believe the recreation fields are also on capital budget tomorrow night.
Yes, they are. That's what that
I
work
had that
was.
discussion again.
Didn't they have it?
They have it tomorrow night.
Say that again?
Didn't they already have that discussion?
Capital planning
Capital, no,
is
capital
talking
is
about
not.
the
Okay.
CPC
The
field.
board has heard it numerous times, so.
Yep.
Capital budget's taking it up tomorrow.
Well, Jim and I went to the regional sewer, what do you call it, partnership potential between Hull, Cohasset, and Scituate on Wednesday over at the, what is it called? The Captain's Cottage, the Lightkeeper's Cottage in Cohasset. And, you know, I have to say, the town of Hull is in a position where they want to either expand, they have the facilities to be able to take in a lot of effluent. Is it 3 million point something they have? And
3,000,007 per day of permitted capacity. They use about 1.7.
Yeah, so they need to make a decision either to use it and augment, you know, and allow people to use it, which would be the town of Scituate and Cohasset, or if not, then because of the cost to maintain the facility, they want to reduce it, I guess, and save money, which makes sense. So they kind of wanted to know from the town of Scituate and from the town of Cohasset, where do we stand on this expansion? And they kind of want to know sooner rather than later. Numbers were presented. I fortunately don't have them with me. They're at my office. But the, I'm sure Jim has it, but the upshot of doing it, which would be a great plan to sewer mine it, North Scituate, coming down Country Way, as far as Arbor Way, going over to Hollitt and going over towards St. Francis, now I guess it's St. Mary's and St. Gregory's Church, which would sewer, how many houses would that, Jim? Do you recall?
Oh, no, I have to go back and look.
Yeah,
but
the
it
number.
was- I think potential build-out, it was over 400,000 gallons of storage a day.
Yeah, which was quite intriguing. The number's pretty high. What they projected it to be was about 59 million plus, so close to 60 million just to do that. So clearly a number which a lot of people are going to be saying, wow. But then again, there was the opportunity to build it with potentially no interest loan from the state. So there's a lot of good things moving in that direction. If the town, first if we could proceed to the next phase, and then if the town could maybe elect to do it in the future, it would certainly be fabulous. But like anything, there's always a rub, and there's always a problem. And unfortunately, Cohasset is not going to make any decision because they're in the midst of their master plan. And so, despite we're in the middle of our master plan, they're not going to do anything until they complete their master plan, is what I took away from it, which means that that could actually put this into, you know, not a holding pattern, I guess the best way of putting it.
We're not going to wait for them to finish their master plan, really.
Like 2 years.
It was discussed that night. Unfortunately, John couldn't stay for the whole meeting. Really, my direction from the board is to find a way to sort North Scituate in those areas and get it done as quickly as possible. Scituate, Cohasset really has a different threshold question. Do they want to soar 3A and some of those other parts of town where this joint project would open to storage? And they're supposed to make a decision on that in a much shorter term. In the meantime, there are some other options that we're looking at. that would achieve part of what we want to do in the short term, and the question we really need to ask the engineers is if we go down path 2, can we come back and do path 1, the bigger project later, without too much re-engineering and things like that. So I still think there's a path available. The major project, again, is going to be a little, they need to come up with a decision whether they want to do it. If not, I've already had a conversation with them, talking about a lesser plan that would pick up, Gannett, Minot, and North Situate at the least. I'm not sure we could pick up a whole lot more than that, but get those business critical and environmentally sensitive critical areas done in the shortest time possible.
So there is kind of...
What's your plan? What's plan 2?
That's plan 2.
I'll give it to you, Tony. I'm not going to talk about it here because we didn't
Okay.
talk about that night, but it does pick up what we want to pick up, and it's a quicker option. There's still a bunch of moving parts. It still involves Cohasset and Hull. But as I pointed out at the meeting, I have a need and no capacity. Hull has capacity and no need. So I literally have to get from here to there, and somehow got to get it through Cohasset.
So the $60 million, that's a betterment that's going to go to all the houses that are sewered, right?
Yeah. That
So-
would go on the betterment.
But that's
correct.
not 60 million just to Situate.
No, that's Scituate.
That's Scituate.
That's our
Yeah,
part.
So that-
yeah, that's not a $60 million write a check up front cost. That's over multiple years to do.
So in order for, our betterment is like $17,000 a house,
What it's
typically.
typically been.
So
Yeah.
we'd have to do
Significantly more than that.
3,500 houses.
It'll be in the high 20s.
So we're going to do 2,500 houses?
I have to go back and look,
Really?
Tony, I don't have that in front of me.
I don't know what the numbers are, but I know,
This discussion. But the other thing that this project does, if you do a regional project, we got the Mass Works grant for economic development. This project ticks off economic development in Scituate and Cohasset. It ticks off environmental protection for the river and the Cohasset Harbor, it picks up all those. It ticks off housing, and it ticks off regional projects. So there would be significant grants available for a project of this size as opposed to just zero interest loans. So that's one of the reasons we're pursuing it. But the cost for us for doing it ourselves and sending it down to our treatment plant or putting a new treatment facility somewhere in North Situate exceeds the $60 million.
but that 60 is premised upon, that's not trying to wheel it the way that you're thinking of trying to. It's premised upon Cohasset paying its $35 million, which one of the individuals there said, well, that'll never pass town meeting in our town. So that was very discouraging from my standpoint, because that was right before I left, because I did leave, coach basketball, but I thought to myself, right when we're hitting the meat of everything, and so if there's another option Jim can explore. The sad part is Hull wants it, we want it, and we're stuck because we can't get it around it, which is unfortunate, but, so we'll see how that progresses.
So we like them to throw the numbers out because we're so early, but the upshot was, we're ready to go to the next phase. We've appropriated the funds, we have the money, but neither Hull nor Scituate are comfortable spending any more money on the next phase until Cohasset tells us,
Yeah.
yes, we want to go through with this, so.
Right.
They told us they'd have it with us probably sometime in March, they'd let us know.
March,
Yeah.
They're gonna get their master plan done by then.
by March.
Aside from that, I have nothing else. Anybody else? No? All right. Then let's go over to correspondence.
All right. We received a letter from Comcast, which reported all of their complaints from to service provider, their service here in Scituate, and they don't summarize it, but most of the complaints were in service interruption and equipment failures. So they're obligated to tell us that, and that is all I have in correspondence.
All right. Next, I guess we have approval of minutes. Somebody have the minutes?
Move to accept the meeting minutes for the Board of Selectmen meeting held on January 22nd, 2019, and January 31st, 2019.
Motion by Ms. Canfield, second by Ms. Curran. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Move to accept and not release the executive session minutes from the Board of Selectmen meeting held on January 22nd, since matter discussed is still pending at this time.
Motion by Ms. Canfield, seconded by
Second.
Mr. Vignani. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right, unanimous. Finally, we're going to move into adjourn. Actually, we're going to go into executive session. And
Won't be coming back.
let's see, what is it? Yeah, I'm just saying, if it says property, okay. I'm declaring that there is, that an open meeting may, that if we have an open meeting, it would have a detrimental effect on the negotiating position of the governmental body, that is, Board of Selectmen in the town of Scituate, to consider the purchase, exchange, lease, or value of real property. And I'm also declaring that after the executive session, the board will not reconvene in open session. I therefore will accept a motion to said effect.
Move that the Board of Selectmen go into executive session to consider the purchase, exchange, lease, or value of real property, and the board will not reconvene in open session.
Motion by Ms. Kerwin, seconded by Mr. Harris. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Roll call.
Mr. J?
Yes.
Ms. Curran?
Yes.
Ms. Canfield?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Vignani?
Yes.
Good night, folks.